Welcome, wrestling fans, to the Pro Wrestle Machine. Whether you're tuning in from the Great American Bash or halfway around the world, we've got a jam-packed episode for you. Get ready to dive into wrestling's rich history, packed with insights, opinions, and a few surprises. And remember, you can skip to your favorite moments with our chapter markers. Let's jump right into it. June 12, 2000 Observer Newsletter, Paul Heyman meets with ECW talent, Pride 9 results. By Dave Meltzer. Paul Heyman, who hadn't appeared at an ECW event since the Hardcore Heaven pay-per-view and after missing the TV taping on June 2nd in New Orleans, surprisingly flew to Pensacola, Florida for the house show for a lengthy ECW team meeting. The one-hour-long meeting was largely a pep talk, since most of the wrestlers hadn't even spoken to Heyman in a month, and with smaller crowds, slightly declining ratings and late checks, morale had hit a new low. Heyman went through a story about where he saw the wrestling business in the U.S. headed. The theory he had was that WWF and USA Network would settle their lawsuit before going to trial because both have so much dirt on the other that would come out in court that both sides' stock prices would drop and suffer public embarrassment. At that point he figured USA Network would get a strong settlement and WWF would go to CBS Viacom, moving Raw to TNN on Monday nights. He talked about the chance that ECW would get on USA Network or possibly Fox. The trial, the results of which should be the catalyst for however the entire business is going to shake up, is scheduled to begin on June 12 in Delaware Chancery Court. Theoretically, it could be as long as 60 days after completion before the judge rules on the validity of USA's case. However, due to the fall season imminency and that the networks involved are already late in finalizing a new schedule, kind of a timetable makes everything precarious. It should be noted that this is not without major risk to McMahon, because the Raw ratings will almost surely drop going to a weaker station. Although with the WWF Raw being destination programming, how much the numbers drop is open to anyone's guess, as Raw and SmackDown both draw far greater numbers than anything on either USA or UPN. Heyman also said there was a possibility WCW could be out of business due to its money losses, leaving ECW as the number 2 company. It is still a more likely scenario that before WCW would actually be folded, that it would sell, even to its rivals at USA, and that even with a rating, that USA would be more likely to buy a group with the star power and stronger ratings of WCW than a company with no proven ratings power or star power but obviously with a better balanced ledger. Heyman went on a long speech putting over the talent of everyone in the locker room, with the notable exception of Raven. He brought up that he would only take a free agent like Randy Savage to put over people already in the company. He said if he's forced to produce more hours of television per week, he'll need more talent, but that all the new talent being brought in would have to put over the established wrestlers in the company. He said if business goes up, he'd rip up everyone's contracts and sign them to more lucrative deals. Multi-Channel News ran a story about the WCW/SFX negotiations, saying that the May 25th meeting between the two sides may have been about acquiring a stake in the company as SFX requested detailed financial information about the company, a 3-year cash flow statement and a listing of all employees, titles, contracts and information about pending litigation. Turner Sports spokesperson Greg Hughes said in the story that WCW was not for sale, but many sources indicate the company is trying to unload the financial burden, but if possible, maintain the programming. The story said WCW is projected to post a $61.2 million loss this year as an entity, and also drain the Time Warner Incorporated earnings because of more money spent on programming costs this year but lesser results as far as garnering ad revenue because of the declining ratings. Jason Hervey and Mandalay Sports have been the intermediary in the SFX/WCW negotiations. Hervey is a longtime friend of Eric Bischoff. The meeting was an all hearts and flowers. Either Jerome Young, New Jack, or John Reschner Balls Mahoney asked Heyman about pay-per-view bonuses. ECW hasn't paid any pay-per-view bonuses in a long time. Heyman said the money was on its way. New Jack went to the window, pointed to the sky and said that he could see them coming. Heyman said if it was up to him, which it isn't, they would go on Tuesdays to avoid the competition from Raw. But he did say they have no choice in the matter and if it's decided they would be on Mondays, he's hoping that they could do well enough on Monday to convince whatever network they are on to move to Tuesdays. It is said that a lot of the wrestlers in the company are of the opinion that going Monday nights head-to-head with Raw would be suicidal. Heyman also claimed that he would never sell controlling interest in the company. He said he would always have the control of the wrestling aspect and it wouldn't be that a company would buy ECW's controlling interest. The reality of that is if a company did buy controlling interest and anyone from the outside made product decisions, the first thing they'd do is bring in Savage as a free agent and make him world champion because they wouldn't know any better and would know the Savage name, the same outsider perception that almost guarantees no matter how the wrestling landscape changes, if any new company buys any old company between now and September, Hulk Hogan will have great leverage even without having any drawing power left. If anything were to happen to WCW, a company with decision-making powers would naturally gravitate towards signing the big names from WCW, who would be seen by nearly everyone as bigger names than the current ECW crew. This explains why it's important to the talent in ECW to make sure they believe, even in the case of a buyout, that Heyman would be in control of the creative end, with enough voting power to keep from being forced out. Heyman claimed the reason the budget has been cut so far back and the TV tapings haven't even had television lights brought in the past 2 weeks is that because TNN broke the promises to ECW, he claimed doesn't want to spend money to make the product look good on TNN. He claimed there was no money trouble, but also said he wants to get the company out of debt by the fall, and said it was because the pay-per-view money trickles in usually starting about 90 days after an event, and that has caused money to be short. This could have been a legit issue in the early days of pay-per-view, but with pay-per-view shows being done for years, the time lag in the money coming in shouldn't leave the company in a cash flow problem. At this point, almost no money is put into promotion of house shows, which has led to the crowds falling, and this can't be blamed on TNN. The local promotion consists largely of flyers and posters put up by Lou D'Angeli, Lou E. Dangerously, and Reinhurst, Jack Victory, and Jim Molyneux, as well as the ECW street team in each city, and whatever free radio publicity in the local market the promotional team can drum up. The Dream Stage Entertainment Pride 9 pay-per-view, Japan only, on June 4th from Nagoya Rainbow Hall once again proved the axiom that when you ask the question as to who is the best fighter, the answer depends upon what the rules of the fight are. Witness Gilbert Yvel. Yvel, who in his last fight defeated Kiyoshi Tamura, giving Tamura his worst beating of his career en route to winning the Rings World Heavyweight Championship, a title which started out as a pro wrestling version of the world title and now is actually defended in shoot matches, looked to be one of the most exciting fighters to watch due to his great kickboxing skill. In rings, if a fighter is taken down, if the action slows on the ground, the referee orders a stand-up. Yvel was taken down repeatedly in every one of his major wins in rings, but his repeated stand-ups allowed him to eventually connect on strikes and put the hurting on his foes. Even before his main event against Vitor Belfort, the psychologically challenged Brazilian who at one point was thought to be the man who would put the sport on the map, Akira Maeda, head of the Rings promotion that he was the champion of before jumping 1 month earlier, said he had no chance to win because of the different rules which don't have as frequent stand-ups. The analysis was right on. Belfort was able to use his superior grappling background to take Yvel down, negate his kickboxing skills, and use ground and pound to win a 20 minutes decision before a crowd of approximately 6,000 paid, announced as 9,156. Either way, this was considered attendance figure considering the high ticket prices and that there was no Japanese name fighter on the show. The biggest news on the show wasn't the fights themselves, but DSE President Naohito Morishita announcing a business tie-in with Antonio Inoki, which means more pro wrestlers on the future shows. This is both good for business and bad for purists and credibility. Unlike in the United States, the entire pro wrestling industry has changed greatly due to the many high-profile shoot shows. Not only have predominantly worked pro wrestling organizations, rings gone from mostly works to 50-50 to pure shoots, but for big shows for New Japan, they need a shoot aura, which the January 4, 1999 Shinya Hashimoto vs. Naoya Ogawa match gave them to draw big crowds and large TV ratings. The success on TV of not only Hashimoto vs. Ogawa in April, but later the May 1st Pride show and the May 26th Hickson Gracie vs. Masakatsu Funaki when it comes to ratings, tells the story of what interests the general public today as it pertains to the pro wrestling industry. And make no mistake about it, in Japan, these ratings and these crowds come largely from fans of pro wrestling. What many feared in 1995, when UFC was gaining popularity while pro wrestling was in a major slump, that fake wrestling couldn't compete with real fighting, which turned out not to be the case as Americans for the most part never cared about the real versus fake issue as it pertained to pro wrestling in the first place. Something promoters finally realized and led to the current boom. In Japan, it is a different story. The two phases are drawn together. The real fights need pro wrestling personalities to draw the large crowds and TV ratings because they are supported largely by wrestling fans, but the pro wrestling also needs to adapt more toward making its big matches have a shoot aura, Because fans who can see the real thing have become more interested in it than the routine well-worked pro wrestling match. Most of the show was designed more to build up August 27th, when Pride runs at the 52,000-seat Seibu Dome in Tokorozawa, a city a few hours outside of Tokyo. For the help of Inoki, they are attempting to put together a match with Tokumitsu Ishizawa, New Japan's Kendo Kashin, who came out without his mask, against Renzo Gracie. Ishizawa, a former national champion in wrestling who those who have trained with him say is great with submissions and his pro wrestling gimmick as being the submission master. There is also going to be an attempt as a ticket seller to get Shinya Hashimoto on the show, which if they can get him in a worked match against a name opponent, it would be a huge draw. They set up a spot where Gracie went to shake Ishizawa's hand, but Ishizawa at first refused to build heat, but finally did. It appears the main event will be Ken Shamrock facing either Kazuyuki Fujita or Mark Coleman, and that the rest of the top Pride stars such as Mark Kerr, Kazushi Sakuraba, Igor Voshankin and Gary Goodridge would all appear. There was a tragedy before the first match, and the card consisted more hyping the next show above matches that were said to be overall disappointing in the ring, with the domination of the better wrestlers in matches that went the time limit. Before the first match began, Brazilian João de Oliveira was badly burned by the pyrotechnics. According to a post by Brazilian promoter Sergio Battarelli, as the two of them along with João Ricardo were in the entrance tunnel, a flame was lit and de Oliveira was badly burned. He ended up with second-degree burns over 40% of his body and will be hospitalized for 2 or 3 weeks. The burns were not life-threatening and it is believed he'll be able to fight again. Obviously, his match with Matt Serra, a protege of Renzo Gracie in New York, was cancelled. 1. Heath Herring defeated Willie Peters in 48 seconds with a choke. Herring, who started his career with Steve Nelson's USWF, took Peters, a rings veteran, down, got his back in the choke in quick fashion. Peters had only 3 days' notice, taking this match as a replacement for Marcelo Tiger, who pulled out. 2. Carlos Barreto of Brazil won a 20 minutes decision over Trey Teligman of Lions Den. Barreto was able to take Teligman down and dominate the positioning en route to the decision. After the match, Barreto issued a challenge to Ken Shamrock. 3. Alan Goes won a 20 minutes decision over Vernon White, the former Lions Den fighter and Pancrase veteran. Goes dominated positioning on the ground en route to winning the decision, and then challenged Kazushi Sakuraba. The two went to a 30 minutes draw previously. 4. Carlos Newton of Canada submitted much larger pro wrestler Naoki Sano in just 40 seconds with an armbar. Sano replaced stablemate Minoru Toyonaga, 21, who in a pre-fight physical 2 days earlier was found to have a brain tumor which is apparently going to end his career as well as a pro wrestler. Sano has the rare dual distinction of competing in both the Pride event and the Super J Cup within a 2-month period. Sano has never looked good in shoots and this was no exception. 5. Akira Shoji submitted John Renkin in 6:42 with an armbar. Renkin was brought in largely because he was the opponent that lost in Masakatsu Funaki's first Valley Tudo Rules match. Shoji dominated the match. 6. Rico Rodriguez, the training partner of Mark Kerr, who seconded both Rodriguez as well as Teligman, dominated the ground game in winning a 20 minutes decision over Canadian Gary Goodridge. Rodriguez was said to have major star crowd charisma and a good look. Rodriguez was able to take Goodridge down and win the decision based on positioning. Most reports labeled the fight as boring. 7. Igor Voshankin defeated former pro wrestler Daijiro Matsui of the Takata Dojo in 5:03 when the match was stopped by the doctor due to blood. Voshankin got his back and started punching. Matsui bled a lot. The doctor checked the cut once and allowed the match to continue, but the second time he stopped it. 8. Belfort beat Yvel via decision after 20 minutes. Belfort was able to deck Yvel and then got the top position, mainly doing ground and pound while caught in the guard during the first 10 minutes round. Belfort took Yvel down twice more in the second round. Yvel got very little offense in and bled heavily from a cut over his right eye. Sakuraba, Fujita and Alexander Otsuka all did color commentary. Renzo Gracie during intermission also challenged Sakuraba for family revenge. Fujita did an interview where he asked the crowd if they'd like to see him against Shamrock, which the crowd popped for. They're building toward the biggest show in Mexico City since the Conan vs. Sin Caras match in 1993, back at the Plaza de Toros, the same building AAA sold out for that match with nearly 50,000 fans. The show is booked for June 17th as an AAA vs. EMLL feud show as a Father's Day special. The matches haven't been announced yet, but a press conference will be held this week with both Paco Alonso and Antonio Pena. Apparently there will be both AAA versus EMLL matches along with matches where wrestlers from both companies team up. It started as an angle on June 2nd at Arena Mexico during a match with Negro Casas and Felino and Antifaz del Norte versus El Satánico and Rey Bucanero and Último Guerrero. AAA wrestlers Los Vatos Locos, Cobarde, El Tejano and Sangre Chicana all surrounded the ring, which led to EMLL wrestlers Atlantis, Villano Tercero and Mr. Niebla also coming out. Televisa, which carries both promotions on television, both of whom air in a 3-hour block on Tuesday nights on Galavision in the US, has been wanting this sort of a show for years, but both sides have been uncooperative at different times in keeping it from happening. News of the joint show was carried as one of the lead sports stories of this past week on the Televisa network news. It is believed the card will air on a few-week tape delay in the United States on Galavision. Daily Variety on June 1st reported that Dwayne Johnson is in serious negotiations to star in 2 major films at a price of nearly $5 million per film. The story reported that Johnson, The Rock, was negotiating to star in an untitled big-budget sci-fi film for Joe Roth, to be directed by Glenn Morgan and James Wong, The Final Destination. He is also in negotiations to play the Scorpion King in a movie as a prequel to Mummy 2, where he'll play the same role. Johnson only has a limited amount of screen time in the latter movie, but apparently Universal Studios was so impressed with his performance that they wanted to build up the character himself in a starring role for a film produced by the same team as Mummy of Jim Jacks, Sean Daniel, and Stephen Summers. Vince and Linda McMahon would also be involved in producing capacities in any movie starring Johnson. The movie for Roth is scheduled for distribution in the summer of 2001. What a successful career in the movies would mean as far as his wrestling future is uncertain. Johnson, who just signed a new renegotiated contract with WWE, will in the same ballpark doing either movie than he would in a full year of being the biggest star in pro wrestling. Johnson is believed to earn approximately $4.5 million per year at this stage of the game, although he'll probably top that figure for 2000 with the unexpectedly high buy rates of shows he's headlined and revenue from his book that topped the bestsellers charts. There is no question the consistent losses of Johnson from the active WWF tour for significant periods of time will impact business, even though as a movie star it could and probably would up his marketability within the wrestling world and make him stand out of the pack even more than he does already. The 5th anniversary of the GAEA promotion, built around the Kurashu Jaruzu teaming up for the first time since the late 80s, held on May 14th at the Ariake Koroshiyamu in Tokyo, was the biggest women's wrestling show in several years, basically since the big mid-90s heyday of women's wrestling in Japan. The show, which drew a sellout of 9,000 fans, sold out well in advance, was considered a huge success and was one of the best shows held this year. 1. Dynamito Kansai pinned Sakura Hirota in 9:38 after a lariat. Hirota does a comedy gimmick, almost like a female version of the old Adrian Street character, wrestling in a blonde wig. There was no wrestling whatsoever in this match. -1 star. 2. Saichi Takeuchi, a rookie with the promotion, pinned Rie in 9:31 with a tiger suplex. Rie used a chain a lot of the way, including putting it on her boot. Very fast-paced match. 2 stars. 3. Choco Inoue pinned Toshio Yamada in 16:58 after 2 lariats. These two had classics in the early 90s and did all the moves and near falls, but their work has declined greatly and the match didn't have much heat. 2 stars. 4. Shuga Sato and Chikayo Nagashima retained the AW tag titles, beating Burati and Toshie Uematsu in 16:15. Bloody is from the JD office and is a very small woman, but a hell of a worker. There were those spots that weren't smooth that kept it from being a classic, but much of the match was tremendous stuff, with great near falls, ending when Nagashima pinned Bloody after a power bomb. 3 3/4 stars. 5. Mayumi Ozachi pinned Kaoru in 29:36 in a Falls Count Anywhere street fight. This match had incredible moments, but probably would have been even better had it been 5 to 10 minutes shorter. Lots of brawling and usage of weapons like numerous board shots as well as ladder spots. Ozaki had this police officer gimmick person who I think was playing some sort of a butch lesbian type role as her second, while Kaoru also had a second. They kept smashing this thick board on each other's head, and Kaoru even used a brainbuster on the board as well as a senton off the top of a ladder which was standing on the entrance ramp through a table with Ozaki on the arena floor. Kaoru also did a moonsault block off an elevated TV camera platform. Ozaki broke the seats out of 3 chairs on Kaoru's head and she was wearing them almost like 3 neckties. Kaoru juiced heavy and Ozaki bit the cut. Kaoru did another senton off the top rope through a table with Ozaki on it on the floor, and a running tombstone piledriver for a near fall. Kaoru got another near fall with a tombstone piledriver on the ramp. Ozaki came back with some great spinning backfists. At another point Ozaki was on Kaoru's shoulders with a leg sleeper and used a chain to lock the arm. Kaoru broke it with a form of a Michinoku Doraiba on the ramp. This was some really creative stuff. Kaoru missed a moonsault off the top of a ladder and Ozaki came back with a Raiga Bomu for a near fall as well as her Techira Sunraizu, half Nelson German suplex on the ramp. Kaoru came back with a superplex off the top of the ladder and a moonsault senton for a near fall. The finish saw Ozaki put Kaoru inside a garbage bag and tied it up with duct tape and just pounded on her with a chain for a near fall. Ozaki then power-bombed Kaoru into an explosives canister and knocked her out inside the garbage bag with punches using the chain for the pin. 4 stars. 6. Eiji Koen retained the AW title beating Meko Satomura in 15-18. This was an old-style slow build with Satomura continually doing Desubare Bomuzu and armbars, her trademark moves, while Kong kept using Stiffy Rachinzu, spinning back fists. A cool spot was Kong having Satomura on her back and going for a Desubare Bomu and Satomura locking a double crucifix from that position. Kong ended up winning after delivering a few more Urakens, finally taking off her gloves and doing a bare knuckle Uraken for the pin. 3.5 stars. 7. The Kurashu Jaruzu defeated Debiru Masami and Achira Hokuto in 2028. The Crush Gals came out to a rock-like reaction wearing their old 80s ring jackets. I've seen more streamers thrown in the past at women's matches but probably not since the 80s. Huge Chigusa chance. Both Crush Gals juiced early and sold most of the way, similar to the old days. Hokuto did a flip dive off Masami's shoulders onto both of them. Masami, who is banged up badly from more than 20 years of doing this, did more than she's done in years here. Crush Gals came back with a double Sukopion Desiroku spot which was their 1984 trademark. After all the near falls the Crush Gals won, pinning Hokuto after an over-the-top, which is their new finisher. Asuka sets up a power bomb coming out of the corner while Nagayo comes off the middle rope catching her on the way down with a diamond cutter. Similar in a sense, but not exactly a 3D. Gigantic crowd pop for the finisher. 3.5 stars. The ratings on June 5th had to be a huge disappointment for WCW, as it was the best hyped Nitro since the first Russo/Bischoff show on April 10th, complete with Bill Goldberg's first match back and almost a pay-per-view-like lineup of matches. During the day, people within the company were talking about the show doing a 4.0 rating. As it turned out, Raw delivered a 5.95 rating, 5.40 first hour, 6.44 second hour, and a 9.3 share. Nitro drew a 2.86 rating, 3.09 first hour, 2.67 second hour, and a 4.4 share. The head-to-head was 5.49 to 2.67, so a down Raw still more than doubled Nitro. The total head-to-head wrestling audience was down to 9.4 million despite WCW hyping Nitro so strongly on Thunder as well as spending more money than usual on advertising the show. The return to the ring of the much-hyped Goldberg vs. Abbott match only drew a 2.90 rating. Although it held the WWF's lengthy open conference with the McMahon family, Rock didn't come out in the first quarter, to a 4.70 rating, the lowest-rated Raw quarter in a long time. Nitro dropped 15% of its audience when Raw started, which at least was a little more than half of what it does in a typical week like the previous one, so that's a positive. That was because they did a tremendous job in the first hour of hyping Goldberg's return, not to mention buying a giant ad in USA Today hyping Goldberg's return. Even though Abbott was totally mishandled as far as making him a threat to Goldberg and building intrigue for their meeting, the fact is Goldberg against a broomstick after 6 months off should have resulted in stronger numbers the past 2 weeks, which shows he's not going to be anything close to fixing the problem, and I think a heel turn will only negate the drawing power he does have, just as it did for Flair, who was the company's only other true draw in a face role and didn't draw ratings nearly as well as a heel. As far as the main event comparisons, Rock vs. Triple H did a 6.47 final quarter and a 7.58 overrun. WCW's main event of Nash running the gauntlet did a 2.70. Other head-to-head numbers saw Raw at 5.97. Conference continues with Rock, Undertaker and Kane involved, the 2.15. Sting vs. Jarrett, which really drives home the value of the WCW belt when someone other than Flair has it, because Sting is a quality contender and nobody knew until after the fact this was non-title as it was sold on TV beforehand as a title match. Raw fell to 5.38, Rikishi and Too Cool vs Venus and Tanda and Benoit vs Road Dogg, while Nitro grew to 2.86, Kimberly and Awesome vs Page and Hancock and Hogan vs Horace, Raw did a 5.26, Briscoe vs Crash Holly, to Nitro's 2.79, Flair vs Russo cage match, and Raw did a 6.13, Rock vs Kane vs Undertaker to Nitro's 2.70, Nash running the gauntlet. SmackDown on June 1st drew a 4.63 rating, equivalent to a 5.4 realistic rating since 15% of the country doesn't have UPN, and network ratings are figured based on the entire universe of homes in the country, while cable ratings, which are less misleading, are figured based only on the number of homes that have access to the station, and 8.2 share. The rating is at a lower level than it had been even though the networks are in reruns. The share has pretty well held steady, because there are fewer people watching TV due to seasonal viewing patterns, but the share should be expected to increase and not hold steady because the network competition is in reruns and SmackDown is always first-run programming. The show opened at 4.02 and generally grew, peaking for the Triple H vs Kane main event at 5.23. Thunder on May 31st drew a 2.78 rating and a 3.9 share. The show grew throughout the first hour, peaking at 3.13 for the Sting vs Kidman vs Horace match and basically held steady for the second hour in the 2.9 range with a slight drop for Chronic vs Palumbo and Stasiak. The main event of Nash and Scott Steiner vs Rick Steiner and Abbott dropped to a 2.49 from the 2.89 for the Flair family saga. The weekend ratings for June 3rd to 4th were not kind at all to WWF. Livewire did a 1.1, third highest rated show of the day on USA, which may be the lowest mark the show has done in years. Superstars at 1.3, eighth highest rated show on station for the day and lowest rated from the period of 10 a.m. through 8 p.m., wasn't much better. Sunday Night Heat at 2.45, highest rated show on station for the day, has now fallen below Thunder as the third highest rated cable wrestling show of the week after consistently being number 2 for most of the past year. Unlike last week, where Memorial Day was a legitimate excuse for the low rating, this wasn't a holiday weekend, and the rating basically stayed steady. WCW Saturday Night did a 1.4, fourth highest rated show on station but second lowest between noon at 2 a.m. ECW on June 2nd drew an 0.82 rating and 1.6 share on TNN. The show grew throughout, peaking at 0.99 for the Rhino vs Sandman match. Roller Jam drew an 0.67 rating while Motor Madness did an 0.71. For May 30th, the AAA/EMLL Galavision 3-hour block drew a 1.0 Hispanic rating. For May 29th, Raw drew a 6.41 rating, 5.84 first hour, 6.98 second hour, and a 10.5 share. Nitro drew a 2.98 rating, 3.21 first hour, 2.75 second hour, and a 4.8 share. The Nitro main event of Flair vs Jarrett with the title switched did a 3.13 rating. Raw's Undertaker vs Rock Lumberjack match main event did a 7.10 final quarter, which also included the Kid Rock concert and a 7.66 overrun. It was interesting to note the concert rating because WCW flopped horribly with attempts at doing concerts on Nitro when it came to absolute ratings destructions every time out, while WWF put one on, granted it was unopposed, and it drew a strong number. WWF did a concert on Raw once before without any positive effect on the ratings. The real negative news for WCW was the long-awaited return of Goldberg to Nitro only led to a 2.58 quarter. Goldberg was actually only on a little more than 3 minutes in the quarter. Before the top of the hour, they showed Hogan coming to the building and Goldberg walking in the parking lot backstage, and with Abbott coming out to Goldberg's music for the next match, basically told everyone Goldberg would be doing a run-in. Even with that tease, they lost 27% of their audience when Raw started, which is the same as a typical week. In the head-to-head quarters it was Raw at 5.41, Undertaker/MC Man/Triple H out, to 2.58 Nash vs Rick Steiner and Abbott with the Goldberg run-in plus Funk vs Vampiro beginning, Raw at 5.78, Godfather and Malenko and Kat vs Brown and Terry and Saturn, to 2.83, Funk vs Vampiro ending, DDP being booted from the house skit, Raw at 6.06, Guerrero vs Angle, 2.77, Blown Angle, Scott Steiner vs Douglas, and Raw at 6.08, Edge and Christian vs Too Cool, to 2.67, Sting vs Kidman. Weekend ratings for May 27th to 28th saw Livewire at 1.7, third highest on station for the day, Superstars at 1.5, fifth highest, which was actually the second lowest between the hours of 10 a.m. and 8 p.m., Sunday Night Heat at 2.44, highest, and WCW Saturday Night at 1.3, third highest. Because of Memorial Day weekend, the overall audience watching television for Saturday and Sunday nights, not as much during the mornings and not for Friday night, was down about 14% from usual levels, which explains the significant drop in the Heat number and can also be used for the WCW Saturday night number. Lee Fields, a legendary wrestler and promoter in the old Gulf Coast territory in northern Florida and Alabama, who was part of not only one of the most famous wrestling families in the history of the business, but one of the most famous families in all of American folklore, passed away on June 4 at the age of 69 after suffering for the past several months with leukemia. Fields, whose real name was Albert Lee Hatfield, was not only cousins to the Welch family that dominated wrestling in the Southeast for decades under both their real name and the stage Fuller surname, but also a direct descendant of the Hatfield family of the Hatfields vs. McCoy's non-wrestling family feud legend of American culture. Hatfield wrestled professionally from 1950 to 1975, and owned and promoted Gulf Coast Championship Wrestling, running cities like Mobile, Alabama, Pensacola, Florida, and Panama City, Florida weekly from 1960 through 1978. He was the son of longtime wrestling referee Virgil Speedy Hatfield, who grew up near Pawhuska, later used as the mythical hometown of Chief Jay Strongbow during his WWF heyday. Strongbow, under his real name of Joe Scarpa, was Lee Fields' tag team partner in Alabama in 1963, near the original Welch family. Brothers, Roy, Herb, Jack, and Lester started wrestling in Oklahoma but migrated to Tennessee where they ran the old Mid-South Wrestling office. Legend has it that Roy and Herb Welch invented tag team wrestling in 1938 in a match in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee against Pop Dugan and Red Roberts. Wrestling had always had a Cooperstown-like legend of tag team matches being invented in Australia, and even as late as the 70s they were referred to in many territories as Australian tag team matches or even Australian rules matches. Virgil Hatfield married their sister, Bonnie Welch, in 1946 and moved to Tennessee to work in the family business as a referee for more than 10 years, as well as promoted many small cities including Jonesboro, Arkansas, training his three sons, Albert, Don, and Bobby, as well as training wrestling bears known as Ginger and Gorgeous Tom. Albert Lee Hatfield started training with his uncle Herb in Dyersburg, Tennessee in 1948 and began his career in St. Louis in 1950 under the name Albert Lee. In 1954, he moved to Mobile, Alabama, to work for promoter Edward Welch, the son of Roy, who was better known in wrestling circles as Buddy Fuller under the name Lee Fields. He became an immediate headliner, feuding with the likes of Mario Galento, Eduardo Perez, Baby Blimp, the original Red Roberts, the original Great Malenko, Frank Fozo, no relation to Larry Simon, who became the more famous Great Malenko years later, Stan Kowalski, and legendary tough guy Rube Wright, working with numerous family members as tag team partners. It is believed that Lee Fields still holds the Mobile, Alabama attendance record, drawing 12,000 fans on May 22, 1957 for a show at Ladd Memorial Stadium where he lost to Perez in the finals to become the first Gulf Coast heavyweight champion. He also drew 7,000 fans on October 9, 1957 at Hartwell Field in Mobile, where he teamed with Galento to win the area's version of the World Tag Team titles from Corsica Joe and Corsica Gene. In 1969, Lee and Bobby Fields worked for Eddie Gossett, Eddie Graham, in the Tampa office as the Blue Infernos in a strange wrestling story. The Infernos, Frankie Kane and Rocky Smith, managed by J.C. Dykes, were a hot drawing hill team in Florida but left the territory for a few weeks. Gossett wanted to bring the Fields brothers in with the idea that fans would believe they were the Infernos and used Gulf Coast referee Joe Powell as their manager, who was also supposed to wear a mask and pretend to buy Dykes, to keep the hot drawing business until they returned. However, Powell didn't get the word, walked into the arena without a mask on the first night, and the entire gimmick was destroyed. A few weeks later the real Infernos returned and beat the Blue Infernos in a mask versus mask match to give closure to the debacle. Fields held the Gulf Coast title 3 times, winning it first for 1 week from December 24, 1958 through January 1, 1959, winning and losing it to local hero Billy Wicks, a second reign on October 7, 1959, winning from the mighty Yankee, Ray Vilmer, before vacating the title when he retired to become promoter. His third reign after coming out of retirement was from December 13 through December 28, 1960, winning and losing it to Pancho Villa. He won the Southern Tag Team titles with Brother Don on November 19, 1955 in Mobile from Charlie Keene and Galento, before vacating them when the promotion started recognizing a World Tag Team title as its main tag belts in 1957. In the 60s, when the belts were revived, Fields held the titles in 1962 with Greg Peterson, in 1963 for 1 month with Scarpa, winning from Don and Al Green and losing to Tiger Tommaso and Villa. He later teamed with Galento in 1964 for a few-week title reign, winning and losing the belts from the Masked Medics, who later became more famous as Dr. Ken Ramey's Masked Interns. He won the title with brother Bobby Fields on February 3, 1965 in Mobile from Terry Garvin and Chin Lee, and then vacated them during another retirement. He held the area's World Tag Team titles, first beating Corsica Joe and Corsica Gene in the outdoor match in Mobile in 1957, losing them the very next week to Jackie and Don Fargo. He and Lester Welch won the titles from the Fargos on February 6, 1958 in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, losing them back to the Fargos 3 weeks later. They had a final run with the belts, beating Kurt and Carl von Bronner on August 3, 1960 in Mobile, but quickly losing them back. He also held the Gulf Coast Tag Team titles with brother Bobby, winning them on March 27, 1968 from Scorpion and Cobra Kid, before losing them 3 months later to the Masked Interns, Bill Bowman and Joe Turner, managed by Dr. Jerry Graham. He and Galento beat the Interns on July 31, 1968, but lost the belts back 2 weeks later, all in Mobile. On December 30, 1959, he announced he would be retiring from wrestling since he had purchased the territory from Edward Welch, and Alabama law at the time stated that a promoter couldn't be an active wrestler. The Athletic Commission gave him special permission to return and went back to full-time wrestling while running the territory. He expanded his territory to southern Mississippi in the 70s and in 1967, ran opposition to Nick Gulas in Nashville. His final match was in January 1975 in Mobile, Alabama against Bobby Shane. He had already started in a second career as an auto racer, winning his first big race he ever competed in, held in 1970 in Pensacola at the Five Flags Speedway. He ended up purchasing the Mobile International Speedway from former wrestling promoter Skippy Wetchen in 1972, and his interest turned more to racing and away from wrestling. He continued to operate the Speedway through the 1999 season when his health began to fail. He ended up selling the Gulf Coast territory to Ronald Welch, Edward's son, Ron Fuller, in 1978. He remained in wrestling, hosting one of the most popular wrestling reunions annually in Irvington, Alabama for the past 9 years, which big-name wrestlers from around North America would migrate to, and had become, long after his promoting days were finished, to many of the wrestlers that attended, one of the most popular promoters they ever worked for. Hatfield's funeral was set for June 12 in Mobile, Alabama, thanks to Scott Teal of Whatever Happened To. Japanese television rundowns. May 17, All Japan. This was a Jumbo Tsuruta special combined with a shot design showing training and other footage to build up the Kenta Kobashi vs. Yoshihiro Takayama Triple Crown title match. It was really sad at the beginning as they went from footage showing Mitsuharu Misawa seeing Tsuruta and his family off at the airport when they moved to the United States last year, and then jumped to just over 1 year later with Misawa at the airport and seeing his wife and 3 young children come back from the Philippines. It's very sad because Tsuruta's youngest boy looked to be about 3 and was clearly far too young to understand the situation. They had a lot of career match clips of Tsuruta, concentrating on a 1977 match with Billy Robinson, the famous 70 minutes draw, and even though Robinson was probably a few years past his peak by then, you can see he was something really special in the ring, a 1980 Champion Carnival final where he won the tournament for the first time over Dick Slater, a good match shown more for it being Jumbo's first Carnival win. Slater at that point can be described as a less charismatic version of Terry Funk, and a 1989 match with Genichiro Tenryu. This match blew away, and I mean totally blew away, any match in pro wrestling this year. It was also interesting to see Tatsumi Fujinami and Tenryu on the All Japan TV show for the Tsuruta tribute. It would be the equivalent of during the Owen Hart tribute show on Raw airing clips of Chris Benoit doing an interview when he worked for WCW. With Tenryu it's even worse because he left All Japan on the worst terms possible, taking a lot of the talent with him, and if it wasn't for the fact that Kobashi and Toshiaki Kawada were really able to step up to the plate and become superstars when thrust into the position many years earlier than would have been done, and in hindsight it was the greatest thing ever for the promotion, the company could have been in real trouble. Fujinami and Tsuruta, even though they never wrestled each other and only teamed together once, are in most fans from the early 80s linked together since Fujinami was the better wrestler than Inoki, but Inoki was the top star in the company, just as Tsuruta was the better wrestler than Baba, although of the two, Tsuruta was more successful when put in the position to carry the company after the big star stepped down. They showed brief clip of the 1979 match where Tsuruta and Fujinami and Mil Mascaras teamed, with a lot of double dropkick spots. They also showed All Japan's first house show after Tsuruta's death, with the wrestlers in every match. bowing respectfully to a photo of Tsuruta after their match and particularly highlighting Jun Akiyama when he did the jumping knee, a move popularized in Japan by Tsuruta. They then replayed a lot of the Tsuruta special that aired last year with Tsuruta himself talking about some of his famous matches. May 20th, New Japan. These are more matches from the May 5th Fukuoka Dome show. 1. Kendo Kashin and Shinjiro Otani and Koji Kanemoto and Tatsuhiro Takaiwa beat Jushin Liger and Shima and Sumo Dandy Fuji and Minoru Tanaka in 14:26. As expected, this was the show stealer. Tanaka, Hani, Shima and Kanemoto were all great, particularly what I believe to be the first time Kanemoto and Shima were ever in the ring together. Right before the finish, Shima did a running twisting dive over the top while Tanaka did a moonsault off the middle rope to the floor. Finish saw Otani pin Fuji with a springboard into a flip kick and a pin. 4.25 stars. 2. Yutaka Yoshi upset Satoshi Kojima in 15:08 with a half Nelson German suplex. The last 6 minutes aired on TV. It was mainly a power match by Yoshi. Kojima did most of his moves such as lariats and diamond cutters. 2.5 stars. 3. Kensuke Sasaki, wrestling as Power Warrior, retained the IWGP Heavyweight title beating Great Muta in 12:44. It was a decent match and actually better than it was described to me originally, but not good for a world title match on a dome show. Actually, the highlight spots belong to Akira Hokuto, as Sasaki's second. Many years back, Sasaki wrestled as Power Warrior as a tag team with Hawk called the Hellraisers during a period when the Road Warriors had been broken up due to problems between the two as well as Animal suffering a back injury. Hokuto gave Muta a Northern Lights bomb at the start. Muta blew missed, which led to Power giving him 3 clotheslines. Muta, due to his knees, can't do much but was still a good worker. Power was below his usual standard, which isn't that great to begin with. Mainly nothing but clotheslines along with Power Strange and Northern Lights bomb. Muta blew missed, hit a moonsault for a near fall and then got an armbar. Power came back with a German suplex and a clothesline. Muta went to blow missed again, but Power blocked it and blew his own missed, hit a clothesline and got the pin. After the match, Hokuto dropkicked Muta off the top rope with Muta on Power's shoulders. 2.25 stars. Mexico. El Hijo del Santo beat Blue Panther on May 28 in Monterrey to regain the UWA welterweight title that he lost about a month ago in the same city. On the May 30th show at Arena Coliseo, Ricky Marvin, in the highest profile match of his career in Mexico, beat Fierro in a hair versus hair match. There was tons of Japanese press at ringside since Marvin is a hardcore favorite there because of his super flying moves. Double juice match. The main event on the show saw Universo dos Mil retain the EMLL heavyweight title beating Rayo de Jalisco Jr. The June 2nd Arena Mexico show was headlined by a non-stip match with Perro Aguayo over old rival Mascara Año dos Mil via DQ when Perro Jr. interfered and Villano Tercero made the save. Aguayo beat Mascara in a hair versus mask match as the semi-final to Conan vs. Cien Caras on the 1993 show at Plaza de Toros that set the attendance record. The June 9th show is headlined by a non-stip match with Villano Tercero vs. Pierrot Jr. as well as Brazo de Plata and Negro Casas and Emilio Charles Jr. vs. Scorpio Jr. and Shocker and Bestias Salvaje. They seem to be building toward an Antifaz del Norte vs. Zumbido mask versus mask match for Monterrey. Torero has returned to AA to form a team with Oscar Sevilla, both of whom do a bullfighter gimmick. Canek had a UWA heavyweight title defense against Pirata Morgan on June 4th in Nuevo Laredo. Well, I guess that would have been headline news if it was still 1984. Super Calo teamed up with his younger brothers Alan Stone and Motocross for the first time ever on Mexico television at the June 1st EURG TV tapings. The main event on the show saw Scorpio Jr. retain the EURG heavyweight title beating Villano Cuatro. On June 11th, they are introducing a new multifacético. The original was in a very brutal and highly publicized murder a few months back. All Japan. All Japan announced a public funeral for Jumbo Tsuruta on June 18 in Tokyo. The full extent of Leon White's injuries in the match with Mitsuharu Misawa in Matsumoto, according to a letter he wrote to the Japanese press, are said to be a fractured jaw, a broken nose, a tooth knocked out and 30 stitches in his mouth, as well as a broken wrist, torn elbow ligament and nerve damage to his left elbow which required surgery. He wrote that his elbow injury was far worse than originally believed and his returning to the ring is in question. White turns 44 this year and due to his size and the bumps he takes, has had numerous injuries over the years, and it's actually quite amazing the year he had last year given his age, size and all the injuries. Not all of it can be credited to the fact he was working with some great talent. Steve Williams and Eric Watts have been teaming a lot on this tour, which has its ironies, because if Mid-South Wrestling hadn't gone out of business, they probably would have ended up being the stars of that company. Watts has already banged up his left knee and right elbow after 2 weeks on tour. After this tour ends on June 9th with the tag title tournament at Budokan Hall, All Japan will restart on July 1st with its debut show at the new 2,000-seat arena near the Ariake Coliseum that is attempting to take over from Korakuen Hall as the home base for Tokyo Wrestling. They also have Korakuen Hall booked on both July 2nd and July 9th and have their biggest Osaka show so far this year on July 11th. Tour ends July 23rd at Budokan. They are giving Yoshihiro Takayama a facelock submission that is close to the old Iron Claw, which was the legendary move in the 60s when Fritz von Erich was Giant Baba's big rival. May 24th TV did a 1.8 rating. New Japan. As of the morning of June 7th, with 2 shows remaining, here is how the Super Junior tournament stands. The A block has 3 still in the hunt, all with 3-1 records: Koji Kanemoto, Gran Hamada, and Tatsuhito Takaiwa. Kanemoto wrestles Dr. Wagner Jr. on June 7th while Takaiwa faces Hamada on June 8th. The B block has come down to Shinjiro Otani, 4-0, and Kendo Kashin, 3-1, who wrestle on June 7th. The remainder of the A block has El Samurai at 2-3, Wagner at 1-3, and Shinya Makabe at 1-4. The remainder of the B block has Minoru Tanaka at 3-2, Katsumi Yujita at 2-2, Kid Romeo at 1-4, and Minoru Fujita at 0-4. There are expected to be some major changes in the hierarchy of the company at the stockholders' meeting at the end of the month. The speculation is that Antonio Inoki will gain more power when the dust settles. Highlights of the June 2nd Budokan Hall show before about 10,000 fans. In the Super Junior tournament, Yujita beat Romeo with a crooked head scissor submission in 6:16, Hamada beat Kanemoto with an armbar in 13 minutes, and Otani pinned Fujita with a Liger Bomb in 9:46. Osamu Nishimura returned with his first match in more than 1 year coming back from testicular cancer, and he lost to Tatsumi Fujinami in 11:29 with the old Cobra Twist submission. In other top singles matches, Masahiro Chono beat Yutaka Yoshi with the STF in 13:58 and Takashi Iizuka beat Yuji Nagata in 16:58 with a choke. The main event saw Kensuke Sasaki retain the IWGP Heavyweight title over Manabu Nakanishi with a Northern Lights Bomb in 2014. Match was said to be better than one would think from these two, as it was said to be a good power bout. Sasaki suffered legit 2 broken ribs in the match and had to be checked out after the match in the hospital, but didn't miss any shows. Nakanishi after the match vowed he would get Naoya Ogawa in the torture rack if he could get him in a singles match. After the match, Sasaki issued a challenge for Shinya Hashimoto to return to New Japan to get the next title shot. New Japan held a 10-count memorial ceremony for Jumbo Tsuruta at this show. In the Super Junior tournament, on May 30th in Tsukuba before 2000, it was Tanaka pinned Fujita and Makabe upset Wagner Jr. June 1st in Kuki before a sellout 2,500 saw Samurai pin Wagner. On June 3rd in Tsu before 3,500, Tanaka beat Romeo, Otani pinned Yujita, and Hamada beat Samurai. On June 5th in Kameyaka before 1,700, Kashin beat Yujita, Wagner Jr. pinned Hamada, and Takaiwa pinned Samurai. June 6th in Ube before 2,500 saw Yujita pin Tanaka, which knocked Tanaka out of the championship picture with a loss, and Hamada pinned Makabe. At the show in Kameyaka, which was the day after the Pride show in Nagoya, the press asked Kashin about the Pride Seibu Dome show. He pretended that he was in Tokumitsu Ishizawa and claimed he was playing pachinko all day the previous day with El Samurai and Nagata in Osaka, and they all went out afterwards drinking beer. Atsushi Onita is asking for his match with Riki Choshu at the Yokohama Arena to be an empty arena match, with the idea it would hype it as something special since this will be New Japan's first attempt at doing a live pay-per-view. The problem is that would kill live ticket sales. They are charging nearly $200 for ringside on this show. Fans know they aren't going to be able to see the main event, and right now there is still more money to be made selling live tickets because not enough homes are equipped in Japan for pay-per-view to ignore the live house as they are in this country. Onita said he would do his most dangerous explosive style match in Tokyo on July 20th, 10 days before this match. He also wanted Choshu to appear at his show on June 18th in Chigasaki. Antonio Inoki was in St. Paul last week to meet with Governor Jesse Ventura to promote solar-powered jet ski. Keiji Muto will be working with a food company called Izaki Greco to develop food supplements such as creatine for the Japanese market. May 27th TV did a 3.4 rating. Other Japan notes. The Toryuman promotion ran the biggest show in its short history on June 4 in Kobe at World Memorial Hall before a reported packed house of 6,500. The main event was Tiger Mask and Great Sasuke vs. Sumo Dandy Fuji and Shima, where the losing team would wrestle each other either in a hair versus hair or mask versus mask match. Mask and Sasuke won, leaving Shima to beat Fuji, who got his head shaved. Also on the show, Suwa retained the NWA welterweight title, pinning Dragon Kid, and Yoshikazu Taro beat Makoto in a loser leaves town match. This crowd for such a tiny promotion shows what happens when fans believe the stipulations advertised actually mean something. There was another inter-promotional match of sorts as Pancrase champion Semi-Schultz defeated Yoshihisa Yamamoto of Rings on June 4 in Holland. The 6-11 Schultz caught Yamamoto coming in with a knee to the head, which split him open. Schultz was pounding Yamamoto from the top before the corner threw in the towel. Yamamoto is another in the long list of Japanese fighters who are fighting too often, destroying themselves in the process. Rings announced its cards for its American debuts on July 15 in Orem, Utah and July 22 in Honolulu. Both shows will consist of two different 8-man tournaments, a heavyweight division and an under 200 division. On both nights there will be the first round matchups, plus a second round. So on both nights, the show will end up with 2 men advancing in each division. The final 4 in each division, 2 from Utah and 2 from Honolulu, will go to the final tournament on September 30 in Moline, Illinois. Monty Cox, who promotes Extreme Challenge in the Midwest, will be running the events. Each tournament eventual winner will get $10,000, which is hardly easy money for winning 4 fights, although it's a lot worse for the guy who goes 3-1 and still has 4 fights, and doesn't even wind up with a good payoff at the end. The matches will be fought under the same rules as the Rings King of Kings tournament were held under over the past year. For the July 15 show in the under 200 division, the fighters will be Griffin Reynaud, Jeremy Horn, Tyrone Roberts, Jason Flynn, Jermaine Andre, Adrian Serrano, Wataru Sakata, and Chris HEYMAN. Based on experience, HEYMAN and Horn should be favored. The heavyweights will have Bobby Hoffman, Craig Montgomery, Joe Leva, Steve Judson, and Tsuyoshi Kosaka. Kosaka and Hoffman should be the class of that field, but we don't know how much Kosaka has physically left after all the beatings he took in 1999. In Hawaii, the under 200 division has Kawika Pahalu, Falaniko Vitali, Hiromitsu Kanehara, Chris Munson, Dave Mena, and Dennis Reed. Kanehara, unless he's physically worn down from all the tough fights he's had, should be the class of that field. In the heavyweights, is Yoshihisa Yamamoto, Henato Babalu, Halai Kulihapai, Cabbage, Yuha Takasari, Chris Franco, and Tom Sauer, with Babalu at least having the strongest rep in the field. They have their next show in Japan on June 15 at the Yoyogi Gym 2 in Tokyo. It's a weak marquee lineup headlined by Kanehara vs. Henato Babalu, which is hardly a strong main event for general public interest. Also on the show is Hoffman vs. Joop Kasteel, as well as the return of Volkan vs. Brandon Lee Hinkle, Georgiev Tsvetkov of Bulgaria vs. Roberto Traman of Brazil, a BJJ world champion at one point, Sakata vs. Brad Kohler, and Mena vs. Ryuki Wayama. Han has been booked in several matches that were to be shoots over the past 6 months but cancelled very time. It'll be sad to see him at the age of 39, and he may be older than that, have to do shoots against younger guys, because it'll ruin the legend he created in worked matches as being the submission master and one of the great workers of the style, and in his youth, he was the real deal as a submission master, but age isn't kind to people in real fights. Satoru Sayama's Seikendo promotion on June 11 at the Tokyo Ariake Coliseum, which will also be a pay-per-view, will have the reputed 7'7", 660-pound 21-year-old Russian Ahmed Zurf against Osamu Tashiakari, as well as Masaaki Sadake fighting Badalia Chen. LLPW ran Korakuen Hall on June 4, headlining with a couple of inter-promotional matches with AJW. In the main event, they had a rare double knockout draw finish with Manami Toyota and Tomoko Watanabe vs. Rumi Kazama and Eagle Sawai, as well as Miyuki Fuji of AJW teaming with Takako Inoue, losing to Keiko Aono and Shinobu Kondori of LLPW. Shawn Michaels students Michael Shane and Ruben Cruz are on tour for FMW. Koji Nakagawa has changed his ring name to Goemon. Right now FMW is split into a feud with Fuyuki Gun, which consists of Mr. Ganasuke Goemon, Hideki Hasaka, Yoshinori Sasaki, Kyoko Inoue, Chocoball Mukai, Fuyuki, and FMW President Shoichi Arai as the heels. The faces, called H-Gun, consist of H, Tetsuhiro Kuroda, Hisakatsu Oya, Riki Fuji, Willie Takayama, Flying Kid Ichihara, and Naohiko Yamazaki. Kentaro Kanemura, Geto, Jado, and Masato Tanaka are their own group, independent. All Japan Women has basically a two-part Grand Prix tournament. It'll start with what they are calling the 21st Century Grand Prix, featuring the younger wrestlers, from June 11th to July 20th with Momoe Nakanishi, Miho Uekazawa, Nani Takahashi, Miyuki Fuji, Heo Nomi and JWP's Kyoko Haruyama. The winner of that tournament will join the Veteran Top Stars tournament from July 20th to August 20th, with the finals at Korakuen Hall. The winner of the second tournament becomes the #1 contender for Manami Toyota's WWWA title. Tomoko Watanabe and Kumiko Maekawa have vacated the WWWA tag titles, and the new champions will be determined in mid-July at a TV taping at the Fuji Network studios. Here and there. Jim Thompson, who was sentenced to 1 year in prison, did a television interview this past week with the Channel 7 News in Detroit. In the interview, Thompson claimed that he never touched an underage boy and what he did was pay for boys to torture him. Jesse James, real name Dmitry Jajukis, who was a star in the 50s, passed away last week at the age of 83. Jajukis was a childhood friend of Raymond George Wagner, who later became the biggest wrestling star of his era as Gorgeous George Houston, and the two went to wrestling matches together. When they got older, they built their own ring and imitated pro wrestlers, doing what today would be referred to as backyard wrestling matches. Jajukis first met a carnival wrestler named Chew Tobacco Bill, who brought him into the fold, and later introduced him in 1938 to pro wrestler Carl Davis, who got him into pro wrestling. Jajukis then paved the way for Wagner to get into pro wrestling, as well as his younger brother, who wrestled under the name Johnny James. Jajukis popularized nip-ups, which at the time weren't done within the confines of pro wrestling matches. There have been many other wrestlers during that time period who worked under the name Jesse James, including Jimmy Judge and Chris Pappas, that he would be confused with. He ended up marrying Terry Majors and went under the name Jesse James after retiring from wrestling and also divorcing in 1975 and relocating to Corpus Christi. After battling Alzheimer's for many years, he lived in a nursing home near Charlotte and was often under the care of his ex-wife. Mark Menlin, 20, a Michigan independent wrestler, passed away on June 1st after suffering a broken neck landing wrong on a press slam spot in a match the previous night in Lincoln, Michigan. Menlin wrestled under the name Kid Gorgeous, and was wrestling Dudeman, real name Ben Alcorn. Dudeman was wrestling in his first pro match and had only 3 weeks of training, but had done backyard matches for years. Menlin had been wrestling for 2 years with the local UWF promotion. Promoter Joseph Reed said that he was putting the promotion on hold, and wouldn't speculate when or if he'd bring it back, according to an article in the local newspaper. Beyond the Mat opens on June 30th in the United Kingdom. Empire, which is the top movie magazine in the UK, reviewed the movie and gave it 4 stars, listing it as the top movie being released for the month of June. There is preliminary work and funding being done to start the Fight Channel in the United States, a planned 24-hour digital satellite television station, which would include boxing, wrestling, martial arts, etc., as well as news shows devoted to the fight world. The planned launch of the station would be in late 2001 or early 2002. They had an article in the latest weekly Pro Wrestling talking about the differences in demographics of today's wrestling audience as compared with the past. They had demos from Wrestling's Last Year as a weekly show on network television before SmackDown this season, which was wrestling from the Marigold Arena in Chicago on the old Dumont Network in 1954. At that point in time, about 7.7 million fans watched the shows every week, which, considering the number of homes that had televisions in those days, at a far smaller U.S. population, is a far more impressive figure than the audience for Raw and SmackDown today. Raw draws about 7.5 million viewers weekly, and SmackDown is roughly in the same ballpark. Wrestling was far more popular with adults, particularly adult women, where pro wrestling in 1954 was about twice as popular as it is today, 3.11 million viewers weekly in those days compared with 1.6 million today. In that era, today's wrestling is far more popular with teenagers and children. Raw draws about 1.65 million teenagers as compared with about 485,000 in those days, and it draws about 1.2 million viewers each week 11 and under today as compared with 570,000 in 1954. As a percentage of the population overall watching on television, pro wrestling was far more popular as a television entity in 1954 than it is today. It was also far more of a family deal, even though it is far more popular with kids today, as in 1954, approximately 2.55 people per household watched when wrestling was on, compared with about 1.48 today. Live attendance at pro wrestling was between 20 and 25 million per year in those days, because every city of decent size in those days had weekly live matches, as compared with less than 3 million per year nowadays. Those numbers really fly in the face of all the common knowledge that Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan made pro wrestling, and that pro wrestling has never been as popular as it is today. On the Memphis TV this week, they made a big deal about Reckless Youth's win last week over Steven Regal, elevating him to a new level of stardom and making him the rival of top contender K-Crush, Ron Killings, for the Southern Championship held by Jerry Lawler. Rodney and Joey Abs from WWF ripped on Todd Morton and Bull Payne. Fabulous Rocker, who does a retro Robert Gibson gimmick, now calls himself Too Sexy, so they're working towards something with Grandmaster Sexay. Rodney had a sling on his arm and they said he had torn a bicep. On Power Pro, they introduced a new tag team called the Texas Outlaws of Austin Rhodes and Ricky Murdoch. There appeared to be a legit injury to Havoc which held up the live show. From those watching on TV, it appeared to be a neck injury or back spasm. As an ambulance came to the building, it wasn't there. They showed a lot of videos to kill time. When they came back, Corey Macklin said paramedics were in the ring but that Havoc had good movement in his limbs. Dave Brown later said it was a neck injury, that he could move his legs and arms and was breathing well but would be taken to the hospital for x-rays, and before the show was out, Brown said Havoc was in good shape. They only had time for 2 matches on TV because of the expected situation. Ron Fuller's second K-Town showdown on June 2nd saw the crowd drop from about 2,500 the first week to an estimated 1,400. We had a very wide variety of attendance estimates for the show. The second week at Chilhowee Park for a main event where Rock and Roll Express beat Jimmy Golden and Dirty White Boy via DQ when Jim Cornette interfered, which led to Bob Armstrong attacking Cornette. Nick Dinsmore, Russ McCulloch and Robbie D all joined in to help Cornette until Steve Armstrong and promoter Ron Fuller made the save. Fuller announced Rock and Rolls and Bob and Steve would each have no DQ tag matches against 4 of Cornette's WWF developmental guys. Well, he didn't say developmental guys. Actually, we're told the best wrestling match on the show was Mark Henry over Robbie D. Announced for June 9th was Tommy Rich, Rico Constantino, and Mongolian Stomper. Terry Landell was there heckling the wrestlers, so it's pretty clear they are doing an angle. Most of the show still revolved around the old SMW feud with Bob Armstrong versus Cornette. Gregory Martin of Maryland Championship Wrestling suffered 2 broken bones in his left leg, a dislocated ankle and tendon damage doing a baseball slide spot. He underwent emergency surgery on May 25th and needed 1 plate, 8 screws and 2 pins to put his leg and ankle back together and isn't expected to be able to return to the ring for about 1 year. IWA had 2 title changes on its June 3rd show in Ponce, Puerto Rico. Andres Borges won the junior title from Ismael Feliciano in Club WWF. Andy Anderson and Steve Bradley won the tag titles from Nueva Generación, Nuevo Gran Apollo and Ricky Banderas. Crowds for IWA have been up the past week past the 700 mark consistently for the first time since the company opened. Feliciano regained the junior title on June 4th in Catano, Puerto Rico from Borges. They also announced these matches for the big show on June 16th at Aquad Buenos, Edge and Christian vs. Too Cool for WWF tag titles, Kurt Angle vs. Perry Saturn, Miguel Perez vs. Bob Holly, a 4-way for the IWA tag titles with Club WWF, Chicky Star and Victor the Bodyguard, Nueva Generación and Sexy and Sensual, a chokeslam vs. body slam match with Pain vs. Headhunter number 2, of 2 out of 3 tables match with Shane vs. Fidel Sierra and Hombre Dinamita, Savio Vega vs. Huracan Castillo Jr. There is also a major controversy in Puerto Rico. The WWC brought out a rookie tag team with a Big Push Thunder and Lightning, and dressed them up in costumes similar to Kane. The word got out and Gerald Briscoe of the WWF contacted the office. The New has since changed their costumes. Nikita Koloff published a book called Breaking the Chains, which is a combination wrestling and religious book. You can get info on the book at 704-795-1146. He is also, along with Ted DiBiase, marketing to wrestling fans, working under them in an internet marketing business. The Nice ran on May 20th in New Rochelle, New York, drawing 1,600 paid for a show headlined by Sabu over Shane Douglas. This was the match teased on the ECW hotline over the weekend about an ECW wrestler beating a WCW wrestler once again, which also featured Christian York, Joey Matthews, Julio Fantastico, King Kong Bundy, Fabulous Moolah, Mae Young, Nicole Bass and the return of David Sammartino. Coastal Championship Wrestling will be running an Alex You Love It memorial show for the Florida-based wrestler who passed away last August while touring Peru on July 29th in Melbourne, Florida at the Auditorium. NWA Worldwide ran a Tojo Yamamoto memorial show on June 2nd at the Fairgrounds in Nashville, where Yamamoto wrestled every Saturday night for about 100 years. Chris Harris retained the North American title, pinning Air Paris in 29:59 in the main event. Former longtime Florida wrestling star and promoter Don Curtis suffered a blood clot in his leg last week and was hospitalized. He still had some swelling as of last reports but was back in the gym training with Luthez, who now lives in Winter Gardens, Florida, by the end of this week. Tiger Khan beat Richard Pound on June 2 in Calgary to win the Commonwealth mid-heavyweight title to set up Khan, who is said to be the best worker in the Stampede territory, against Sabu when he comes in on June 8 in Stettler, Alberta, June 9 for TV in Calgary, June 10 in Lloydminster, Alberta. Sabu faces Greg Public on that show June 11 in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan and June 12 in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. ICW on June 17 in Ina, Illinois is headlined by California Kid vs. Bunkhouse Buck. According to Ring Around the Northwest, Oregon indie wrestler Terry Kirk suffered an apparent career-ending injury compressing two vertebrae in his back on May 6 in Gresham, Oregon. Kirk also wrestled under a mask at times as Young Glory in the area. Billy Jack Haynes' promotion in Oregon is scheduled to debut in July. Haynes, 46, says he is not going to wrestle on the shows. Among those involved include a half-brother of Sean Stasiak, Stan's stepson. For those into the territorial days of wrestling, there is a website called kfabimemories.com regarding 1975 through 95 pro wrestling. Howard Brody is planning on running monthly shows at the old Fort Homer Hesterly Armory in Tampa starting on August 15, which was the home of CWF Wrestling in its glory days, every Tuesday night. Sean Barr, brother of Art, is telling people he is going to Mexico to wrestle under the name Love Machine, which was Barr's gimmick where he became arguably the best heel in the business working in AAA. Bruno Sammartino, 64, has told people that on June 17 in Hamburg, Pennsylvania, when he does an autograph signing as part of the Pennsylvania Championship Wrestling card, that it will be his last appearance at a pro wrestling show. There will be a musical called Blitzkrieg about pro wrestling opening on Broadway next month at 151. It's a comedy about a kid who believes he's on a mission from God to straighten out pro wrestling but doesn't realize the matches are works. Rena Maro's cover shot in Muscle and Fitness will be on the newsstands on June 20th. James Crookshanks, JC Ice aka Jamie Dundee, is booking wrestlers to do work skits and writing storylines for the Jerry Springer Show. Incredibly Strange Wrestling on June 9th at the Fillmore Auditorium in San Francisco. Former WWF Minis Max Mini vs. Torito, Zuki vs. Espectrito I in Mexico these days, headline FWF Lucha Libre on June 11th in Pomona, California at the Fox Theater. MMA. In what was billed as Andy Hug's final match ever in his home country of Switzerland in K1's annual big show in that country, on June 3 before a sellout of 14,000 fans in Zurich, Hug won via 5-round unanimous decision over Mirko Krokop to keep the WKA World Muay Thai Super Heavyweight Championship. That show will air on Fuji TV on June 10. K1 had a show scheduled for Cape Town, South Africa on June 10, but it's been moved to July 1. Pride announced that they would attempt to put together a Rickson Gracie vs. Kazushi Sakuraba match, while Yuki Kondo talked about facing Gracie as well. There was a lot of mainstream press regard to both of these challenges. The reality is that while Sakuraba or Kondo may give him tougher matches and have proven themselves, they still aren't dome-level ticket-selling names, which is the unfortunate reality. The biggest name for box office would be Naoya Ogawa, but Antonio Inoki isn't about to put Ogawa in there if he's not in control of the situation, because they are basically trying to mold him into the new Inoki as Japan's wrestling hero. Funaki's retirement was covered as the lead sports story on the Nippon TV network News on May 27, which is the most respected newscast in the country. However, in the story, they claimed Funaki had lost to Gracie, who has a 450-0 record. One of the reasons the crowd appeared small at the Tokyo Dome was because it was a total one-match show, so the high roller types, like at a boxing match in the US, who didn't care about the undercard, arrived late. There are reports the show may have legitimately drawn 30,000 paid, which is quite frankly along the lines of what the Pride Grand Prix tournament drew. The reality of martial arts is that a dream match between two mainstream names who are probably no longer top-shelf fighters outdrew the biggest card in history from a realistic name-value perspective, featuring the toughest tournament ever held. Akira Maeda and Nobuhiko Takada were not at ringside for the Coliseum 2000 show. The major pro wrestlers at ringside, who all got a huge pop when shown on camera, were Yoshiaki Fujiwara, Tatsumi Fujinami, and Shinya Hashimoto. The Rickson vs. Masakatsu Funaki match was a major letdown after all the hype. I'm not sure what happened to Funaki, but whatever he was before the end of 1997, when he was still good enough to beat Guy Mesder, Yuki Kondo and Semi Schultz among others via submission, he hasn't been in years. It was as if he offered actually less competition to Gracie than Takada did in their second match, and he never even really tried to fight. They were tied up in the corner early, with Hickson expending far more energy attempting to take Funaki down while Funaki used the corner as his ally. They largely traded knees to the thigh. Hickson did get a swelling under his left eye, so he must have been tagged at least once. Gracie was sweating, so in practice, Funaki not doing anything early since it was a no-time limit fight seemed to be smart, since Gracie was sweating bullets and Funaki didn't even have a hair out of place. At the 8:15 mark, when they were both still on their feet in the same corner, Funaki grabbed a front facelock and they went down with Funaki on top. Funaki got right back up, while Gracie laid on his back. Funaki started throwing a lot of kicks to Gracie's leg as he laid on his back. He got some good shots in, although nothing of the caliber of the shots Sakuraba gave to his two brothers in their fights. Gracie got tired of the punishment and went to get up, which is exactly, theoretically, where Funaki should have wanted him. As soon as Gracie got up, he immediately and easily took Funaki down, got a side mount and then a full mount with Funaki offering no apparent resistance. Gracie then outmuscled Funaki, despite Funaki being the larger and more powerfully built man, and pulled his arm out of a block position with one arm and began punching him over and over in the face with the other, cutting Funaki above the eye. Funaki turned and Gracie sunk in a great choke for the win, which was actually in 11:49. We listed the time in last week's issue as 12:49, which was incorrect. The belief is that Funaki, because he has a very bad knee, will not go into pro wrestling. A correction from last week. The legendary Funaki vs. Boss Rutan match was September 7, 1996, not 1995 as listed here. Funaki will now work as executive producer for Pancrase as well as train fighters and help with the matchmaking. Funaki has talked about his main goal to train Kondo to beat Gracie. ECW. There wasn't a lot of major stuff inside the ring over the weekend. The June 2 New Orleans TNN taping was headlined by Dreamer and Sandman over Rhino and Credible, but after the match, the heels were beating on the faces until Van Dam made the save. Tony Marinara seems to have gotten himself a job with the sick bumps he took the previous week, as he was working with the FBI and helped Little Guido beat Mikey Whipwreck. The new FBI also laid out Balls Mahoney, who ran in for a save, to set up a Whipwreck and Mahoney team. They also set up a tag feud with Danny During and Roadkill vs. Simon Diamond and Johnny Swinger. It started with the Baldies, Tony DeVito and Angel this weekend, since Vic Grimes missed the weekend moving back to California, or During and Roadkill when Swinger and Diamond interfered. Swinger and Diamond then wrestled Nova and Chris Chetty, which saw Nova and Chetty win when During and Roadkill interfered. They also taped a match where Scotty Anton beat Raven clean with a Scorpion Deathlock. The June 3rd house show in Pensacola was said to be a good show with an atrocious main event. After strong matches where Credible kept the ECW title beating Jerry Lynn, and Van Dam beat Guido, came the main event, Sandman and Tao and Dreamer and Raven beating Victory and Corino and Anton and Rhino. At one point during the match, Sandman, who appeared in no condition to perform but was still out there, falling all over himself, doing incoherent mic work, including saying that the reason Raven was seeming so miserable was because he'd been straight for 34 straight days, and finally, after getting everyone in the match mad because he'd ruined the match, it was described as one of the worst matches you'll ever see. He stripped to where he was totally exposed, with Dreamer frantically trying to put his hand in a strategic place to keep people from seeing him, which was an impromptu spot, telling the audience that didn't understand that he was going to do what he did backstage, where he was running around naked wearing nothing but Roadkill's hat. He also tried to pull Jazz, who was fully dressed, against her will, into the ring after the match. It was described as funny for the first few minutes but totally embarrassing quickly enough. In the real world that would be cause for termination, but since he's been working drunk as his gimmick for years, the company in a sense can't complain when he goes into the ring in no condition to perform, because he borders on that state as his gimmick regularly, but this was said to be his all-time worst. Problems continued after the match was over, particularly involving Victory, who was stiffed with a cane shot and also mad since he promoted the show and thought the main event killed the city for return business. Heyman said afterwards that he was going to suspend Sandman for a week or two and heavily fine him. Van Dam has signed a multi-year deal starting in July with Mox Concepts and Shadow Promotions to license and create a Van Dam comic book. June 2nd TNN show was from Toledo with some very bad lighting. Raven did an interview and Credible came out and they went at it. Raven actually did a drop kick before Credible caned him twice and gave him the tombstone. Anton attacked Raven afterwards. Cyrus also attacked Raven. Anton put HC Lock in the Scorpion and Cyrus and Anton started doing the American Males clap, which they are terming giving the crowd the clap. Guido and Tony Marinara, who is referred to as the man known in WCW as Tony Marinara, and then called Tony Mamaluke, argued backstage. Cash beat Vic Grimes in 421. Grimes works a lot better matches with smaller guys because he has some unique power moves he can pull on them. There were a few missed spots and a lot of good spots, ending with Cash winning with a front-rolling cradle. Swinger was posing in front of a fan, the kind that blows the air, not a wrestling fan, and in a double entendre, said, "Can't you see my fan is blowing me?" Simon Diamond was there attempting to get away from comedy while they had Mitch holding the fan, and Prodigy and Prodigette arguing in different languages and the Musketeer running around. Whipwreck beat Mamaluke in 236 with that sick finisher out of Big Japan that ends in a version of a tombstone piledriver. Mamaluke missed on moonsault outside the ring and hit his head on the guardrail almost like he piledrove himself. And then he got up fine and finished the match. That may have been the sickest bump of the year. After the match, Guido attacked Whipwreck, but Whipwreck gave him 2 whippersnappers and set up a spot where Sinister Minister would throw fire. But Sal E made the save. Whipwreck threw powder at him. He was blinded, so he thought he grabbed Whipwreck, but instead destroyed Mamaluke, including throwing him into the crowd. I was at first skeptical of those stories about him already having 20 concussions or whatever the number was in his early 20s, but seeing what he did in just 230, it's totally believable. WCW wouldn't use him for those very medical reasons. He's got himself the job here. Heyman did an interview screaming at TNN, running them down for ruining the company, which was kind of a worked semi-shoot type of deal. It's clearly positioning the company as standing up to the oppressive network when the inevitable dumping comes, as well as diverting attention and diverting blame for the ratings. Joel Gertner was edited out as well, talking about them paying Vince McMahon $100 million. I'm sure this is only the beginning. All the audio was edited off both interviews. TNN scrawled over the interview of Heyman, "Please ignore this gentleman's temper tantrum. Could it be he's been through too many tables?" Later, as they aired an interview with the audio bleeped out, they ran a crawl stating TNN harbors no ill feelings on ECW and TNN fully supports ECW and all its redeeming qualities. So much for the Cyrus angle that they've built the company around. On the Gertner interview, you could hear crowd noise in the background, so the tape was delivered with the ability to audio edit out only the interview but not the crowd noise. Final was Rhino vs. Sandman. It ended in a schmoz. Dusty Rhodes, who looked painfully overweight wearing a t-shirt and short jeans, was pounding on Corino outside the ring. Sandman gave Rhino a pile driver on a table and caned Victory and Corino. They finally got Sandman down and Dusty saved. They got Dusty down until Tao saved. Anton attacked Tao, leading to the musical save by Rob Van Dam, complete with everyone winding up outside the ring and Van Dam doing a flip dive. The May 26 TNN show featured 2 good matches and the anti-TNN diatribe, which started out funny but by the end got totally annoying and really made both Joel Gertner and Joey Styles come across poorly. Simon Diamond insisted he wanted to be taken seriously while looking in the mirror in the bathroom. First, Prodigy and Prodigette came out of the same bathroom stall, and then Mitch the ring announcer and the Musketeer came out of a bathroom stall together. Finally, Johnny Swinger came out and it looked like they were setting them up as a tag team. Tanaka beat Mahoney in 11:04 with a tornado DDT through a table covered in thumbtacks. Lots of hard chair shots as well as good moves and near falls. The match seemed too much like a connect the dots match, as if they were going through a series of pre-planned spots as opposed to working a match. There was definite emotion missing as compared with some of their previous matches, but they did a lot of good moves and it was still a good match. Sally Graziano attacked the Sinister Minister. He sold like Whipwreck threw fire at him, although we barely saw a flash, which I guess represented a fireball, and Mikey and Minister laughed hysterically. Cyrus and the network came out with Scotty Anton as the new member. Anton was clapping his hands over his head like he did when he was a member of the American Males Tag Team with Marcus Bagwell. As geeky as that was then, it's even worse now, but at least now he's doing it as a heel. They made a remark that he's giving people the clap. Cyrus then said that he didn't want Tao wrestling Anton because putting a match with 2 men with the same hair color is a ratings killer, and instead brought out Lynn to wrestle Tao. This was a really good match, ending with the cradle pile driver by Lynn after Jack Victory tripped Tao and Steve Corino super kicked him. After Lynn left, the network beat up on Tao until Van Dam made the save. Anton cut off Van Dam and had him in the Scorpion Deathlock when Tao Blue missed to save Van Dam, and Van Dam then did a running flip dive over the top on Corino, Victory, and Anton. The show ended with a Dawn Marie video and an interview where Stephen Prozik went to interview Raven backstage. Francine came out to confront Raven and they did a camera shot right up her dress. Credible laid out Raven with the title belt, and then came Dreamer. Sean Evans and Jorge Estrada, who worked prelims last week in Ohio, are two students of Dusty Rhodes. WCW. On the TV ads for the Great American Bash, instead of saying the surprise is something that will change the face of wrestling, instead they are billing the surprise as something that will change the career of Nash. It gives more credence that it's simply Goldberg turning heel on Nash and costing him the title and joining the New Blood, or worse, Hall returning and turning on Nash. Nitro on June 5 in Atlanta at the Phillips Arena drew 13,487 fans, with 5,939 paid for a $178,295 gate. On TV and on their website they claimed the show was sold out, but there were more than 6,000 potential seats left open and more than half of those in the building were paper. Overall it was a good self-contained show, but it was really bad when it came to pushing the pay-per-view and the ending was terrible. The basic gist of the show is they put all the faces over, which theoretically shouldn't be done the week before a pay-per-view except for Bischoff and Russo. Bischoff actually brought up that Luger and Elizabeth weren't there while Russo challenged John Rocker. Russo challenged Goldberg. Goldberg came out and mowed through the security guys while Russo and Bischoff ran. A second group of security ran out and then all ran away. Stasiak and Palumbo, now called Perfect Sean and the main event, kept the tag titles beating Chronic in 6:03. Fast-paced but really bad match. Miller choked out the ref and ordered him to count the guys out. Adams threw Stasiak in the ring so he actually beat the count. Chronic went after Miller after, but Stasiak and Palumbo saved him, so Chronic laid those guys out after the match. Bro beat Kidman in all of 153 with a Uranage when Torrie Wilson turned on Kidman and gave him a low blow. Kidman no-sold it, because he was wearing a cup. The cameras basically missed the spot, but luckily the announcers explained why Kidman wasn't selling it. Of course his wearing the cup made 0 sense since the spot was to lead to the pin. Kidman hit a few of the MIAs with a chair after. Bischoff vs. Funk for the hardcore title went backstage quickly. Thanks God. Miss Hancock came out. Awesome and Kimberly came out as well. Kimberly hit Hancock with a lame shot with a clipboard. Hancock then challenged Kimberly to a match later in the show. Kimberly accepted but Hancock walked out and said it would take place later. Funk and Bischoff then resumed their match. Russo told the Mamalukes to hit the ring. Vito hit Funk with a chair, a broom handle to the groin and a DDT when Bischoff pinned him to win the title in 3:11. Scott Steiner kept the U.S. title beating Vampiro in 5:07. Vampiro hit Steiner with the blowtorch. Midaja then saved Steiner with a crossbody off the top. Vampiro was chasing Midaja and about to set her on fire when Sting made the save with a bunch of bat shots. In the ring, Steiner gave Vampiro an overhead belly-to-belly and the recliner for the submission. Goldberg destroyed Abbott in 2:14 with a spear and jackhammer. Rick Steiner hit Goldberg with 2 chair shots in the first 40 seconds, one of which split Goldberg's head open in the back. Nash made the save and tripped Steiner before Goldberg speared Abbott. Sting pinned Jarrett in 2:24 to apparently win the title. On TV, they strongly implied it was a title match, but after Sting won, Bischoff got on the mic and said it was non-title. Sting then continued to attack Jarrett after putting the Scorpion on the ramp and finally hitting Jarrett with a guitar shot and he fell off the ramp. Hancock and Page beat Kimberly and Awesome in 5:21. The women were awful, but they weren't in much and did get a reaction. Page and Awesome were really good and since they worked most of the way, it was a good match. Awesome was about to kill Page when Hancock started lifting up her dress. Awesome froze and DDP hit the diamond cutter for the pin. Hogan came back as Hollywood Hogan and beat Horace Hogan in a cage match with a leg drop on a chair in 3:09. Kidman attacked Hogan after, but to build heat for the pay-per-view, Hogan threw Kidman over the top through a table. Russo beat Ric Flair in the cage match in 9:30. Ric Flair is the greatest wrestler who ever lived and this match was living proof as this 51-year-old man actually carried Russo and David to what, after some terrible stuff early, to a good match. They pulled Russo's shirt off which wasn't a pretty sight and Flair chopped him raw. David came in from under the ring and Rick chopped him up as well. Russo got a ladder and climbed out of a trick ceiling and Flair climbed up with him. They fought on top of the cage. People actually expected Russo to take a Foley bump off. They ended up back in. Flair put him in the figure 4 for what seemed like an eternity. Russo, being the toughest man with 11-inch arms that ever lived, withstood the move longer than just about every babyface in the history of Jim Crockett Promotions without even passing out from pain before the blood dropped from the sky. For some reason that I can't figure out, the blood immobilizes everyone except the heels, which it doesn't affect. It appeared the blood was supposed to drop much sooner, thereby not making the figure 4 spot so ludicrous, and that David was supposed to pull Russo out of the path of the blood, so only Rick would have to sell it. Neither happened. David put the figure 4 on Rick and Russo covered him for the pin. If that wasn't silly enough, Nash beat Disco, Condito, Johnny the Bull, Vito and Mysterio Jr. all in about 5 seconds. These guys were pinned so quickly that they took one move and laid there and Nash didn't even cover them some of the time. Finally Awesome, Palumbo, Conan, Douglas, Vampiro and a few others all attacked Nash. The idea was to get heat on Nash for Goldberg to make the save, but Nash didn't bother selling for 6 guys and Goldberg's run-in seemed almost unnecessary as the two of them cleaned house as the show went off the air. Bischoff ended the show saying that Goldberg would be suspended for interfering. Goldberg, in Jim Varsalone's column in the Miami Herald, said about his return, "I don't feel completely ready physically or mentally to be back. To let myself go 1000%, all out, like I normally do, I'm just not close to that point. But I am ready to come back in some capacity to contribute in some way, shape or form." In regards to the angle on May 29th when he returned, he said, "I felt a little sore after that. I felt uncomfortable prior to that, but once my adrenaline was going, I forgot all about the injury. Unfortunately, my adrenaline is probably my own worst enemy, because it masks a lot of injuries that I have." The A&E Hogan biography piece is scheduled for June 13th. The show is being called Hulk Hogan, American Hero. Alex Merves has a review of the show up on WrestlingObserver.com. He said the strength of the show was the early footage and interviews. Hogan changed his story about getting into the business. It used to be that he was working at a bank and saw the size of the checks the wrestlers in Tampa were coming in cashing. Now the story is he got into an argument with a wrestler who was hitting on his girlfriend when he was on stage playing with his band. A legend, that wrestler may have been Jack Briscoe. And then afterwards the wrestler took him to camp, Hiro Matsuda's camp, where he had his leg broken. There was a negative interview with Jesse Ventura in the piece. The steroid controversy was brought up and brushed aside with the narrator claiming Hogan had taken steroids earlier in his career before they were outlawed. Hogan admitted that the controversy temporarily ruined his career and that the company promoting Hulk Hogan vitamins at the time went broke. The show then talked about his success in WCW, but never mentioned his and the company's decline over the past 2 years. Merves said that Vince McMahon's role in Hogan's success was greatly downplayed in the piece and felt it was nauseating to hear Hogan talk about how you can't take shortcuts in life, even though his own steroid use contradicts that statement. Also interviewed on the show were Hogan's longtime best friends in the industry, Jimmy Hart, Ed Leslie, Gene Okerlund, and Brian Knobbs. Lex Luger and Elizabeth were sent home after refusing to do the planned angles for them at the May 30th Thunder tapings. Luger was supposed to do the run-in, attacking Palumbo, which would cause the DQ and Chronic's tag title loss to Palumbo and Stasiak, where the title could change hands via DQ. In the case of Elizabeth, there is a good deal of sympathy in her direction because they wanted her to be a wrestler and do a wrestling match with Kimberly at the pay-per-view, evidently being switched to Kimberly versus Miss Hancock, and she was never trained to be a wrestler. There is a lot less sympathy for Luger, who didn't like the way he was being booked with the program with Palumbo, who clearly isn't ready, but then again, Luger was once in Palumbo's shoes as being pushed long before he was ready, and all the veterans of that era put him over strong because everyone thought he had potential to be the next Hogan, which he never turned out to be. Daphne missed TV last week due to tonsillitis. Page may take a significant amount of time off to rest up the back he injured while doing a run-through in the triple-decker cage match. Daphne, at the age of 10, appeared in the movie Santa Claus that starred Dudley Moore. Some notes from the May 31st Thunder TV show. During the Jarrett vs. Douglas match, there was a sign that said, "They get Kid Rock and we get Chad Brock. Hee-haw." Lance Storm was given a June 12th start date. Great Muta is scheduled on either the June 19th Nitro in Billings, Montana or the June 26th Nitro in Des Moines, Iowa, since New Japan has been running this angle for months, where WCW has stolen Muta from New Japan, and since the angle, he's never actually worked a WCW show to try and make the angle legit. He's also scheduled for June 20th Thunder in Bozeman, Montana. Christopher Daniels was at the June 5th Nitro and was scheduled to have his first match against Chris Condito at the June 6th worldwide tapings as part of Thunder in Knoxville. 2 Cold Scorpio was also backstage at Nitro. Bret Hart's doctor sent WCW a letter on May 26 stating that the full extent of his injuries were uncertain. Whether he will fully recover from the injuries is uncertain, and basically ruled out any chance of his wrestling for another 6 months, which would be until the end of November. Hart has a meeting with Dr. Jim Kelly, who is Eric Lindros' doctor, scheduled for some time over the next week to try and get a better handle on the problem and possible solutions to where he can come back. His contract expires on November 30th, and with the nature of the injury such that he's unlikely to be able to wrestle until the last week of that contract, if then, it makes his status with the company in major jeopardy. WCW could legally fire him now, but it could set off a very negative PR response, particularly in Canada, if it were to do so. He is going to at least explore possible acting gigs, which he attempted in 1996 for several months after leaving the WWF, only to return to wrestling later in that year. Vince Russo stated that because they don't have any definite timetable of when he can return to wrestle, they have dropped all angles involving him. Hart had been booked to appear on every Nitro and Thunder starting with May 15th, but each week was then told not to come. After his performance on the May 31st Thunder doing the substitute boss gimmick, expect Ernest Miller to get more airtime. La Parka either quit to work for EMLL or is still with the company technically but is working for EMLL. There was an article in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution talking about a protest at Nitro involving 12 wrestlers along with Sonny Ono as well as the Rainbow Coalition civil rights organization charging WCW with discriminatory practices. If such a protest took place, it didn't garner a lot of reaction that night. Major events for August and September: August 1st Thunder in Terre Haute, in August 7th Nitro in Denver, August 8th Thunder in Colorado Springs, Colorado, August 13th New Blood Live pay-per-view in Vancouver, August 14th Nitro in Kelowna, BC, August 15th Thunder in Kamloops, BC, August 21st Nitro in Wichita, Kansas, August 22nd Thunder in Tulsa, Oklahoma, August 28th Nitro in Las Cruces, New Mexico, August 29th Thunder in Tucson, Arizona, September 4th Nitro in Dallas, September 5th Thunder in College Station, Texas, September 11th Nitro in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, September 12th Thunder in Charlotte, September 17th Fall Brawl pay-per-view in Buffalo, September 18th Nitro in Toronto, September 19th Thunder in Erie, Pennsylvania, September 21st House Show in Oklahoma City, September 25th Nitro at the Nassau Coliseum, and September 26th Thunder in Wilkes-Barre, PA. Shane Helms finally had the reconstructive surgery to fix his broken nose. Meng has been given notice. Thunder tapings on May 30th in Boise. ID drew 5,438 in the building, which was 2,722, paying $62,496. WWF. For King of the Ring on June 25th in Boston, it looks like it'll be some form of a gimmick match with Vince and Shane and Triple H versus Undertaker and Kane and Rock, or something similar to that as a main event. I'm expecting Dudleys versus Road Dogg and X-Pac and possibly Too Cool versus Edge and Christian for the tag titles and the quarterfinals, semifinals and finals of the King of the Ring tournament. It is definite they'll go in with the idea of 7 core matches on the pay-per-view. With injuries and such, they may actually produce less. And there won't be a singles WWF title match or a 4-way, at least unless plans change. Raw on June 5th in Rochester, New York drew a sellout 9,787, paying $286,993. The show opened with a lengthy, way too lengthy as in 27 minutes long, gabfest. Triple H, who it surely seems will be going face sooner than later, went on forever and teased a split with Vince. Vince, who actually came out to a face reaction which was clearly the reaction expected, was about to square off with Triple H until Shane was the peacemaker. All three wanted to be the one who would run the company. Vince and Triple H both decked Shane before Stephanie slapped everyone. Rock, Kane and Undertaker all came out wanting a title shot at Triple H. They made a 3-way with the winner getting the shot later in the show. Test and Albert and Venus beat Too Cool and Rikishi in 4:46 when Venus hit Grandmaster with the title belt for the pin. Grandmaster is really unpopular with a lot of the wrestlers, so if Too Cool breaks up, it's because they are trying to get the word out that Scotty and Rikishi, who are over and GMS can't hang, figuring on his own, he'll be stuck in metal matches. Crash Holly tried to attack Briscoe during a faction hug, but the door was shut and he ran into the door. Benoit beat Dogg in a core qualifier in 141 with a German suplex when the Dudleys distracted Dogg. Dudleys teased putting Tori through a table afterwards, but X-Pac made the save. Patterson and Briscoe were doing an interview and Crash tried to hit Briscoe with a chair but instead hit Patterson. Crash challenged Briscoe. Crash continued to play his role as a petulant little child. Briscoe won the match in 2:21 despite Briscoe being gagged to death with Patterson's stained underwear. After grossing out Briscoe and most of the audience, Crash ran into a stop sign and Patterson and Briscoe both covered him for the pin. Rock won the 3-way in 3:43, pinning Kane with a rock bottom after Triple H, at ringside, hit both Undertaker and Kane with chair shots. Triple H then hit Rock with a chair shot after the match. Undertaker was really looking old and out of shape. If they aren't careful, Undertaker is going to wind up, because of his name and that he has to be pushed, but can't perform or do a good interview, like one of those old guys on top in WCW that can't be moved out and the company suffers in the long run. Guerrero and Chyna beat Malenko and Godfather in 250 when Guerrero pinned Malenko with some awesome wrestling into an inside cradle. Lawler asked about Godfather getting a pipe job. They teased a spot where Guerrero was fooling around with a hose at ringside and Chyna got mad, but it didn't go any farther. In another core qualifier, Bob Holly beat Farouk in 304 with his Wadata maneuver. In a really good match, Edge and Christian and Angle beat Dudleys and Jericho in 409 when Angle pinned Baba with his Olympic Slam. Jericho was great wrestling, but the fans chanted for tables. After the match, they gave Angle a 3D through a table after Jericho had put Angel in the walls. Hardys beat Bossman and Buchanan in 239 when Jeff pinned Buchanan after a swanton. Lita was backstage watching Hardys. Bossman and Buchanan did their split up after the match with Buchanan walking off, and then Bossman hitting him with a nightstick. I think we saw the same angle with Albert. Triple H did yet another interview. Boy, it was clear who was in the ear of the people who put together the TV show. They did an angle to set up Stephanie defending the title on SmackDown with Ivory and Jackie challenging. Triple H beat Rock in 931 to keep the title in another really good match. Triple H took a backdrop onto the table. DX and McMahon's all came out. Rock used the people's elbow, but X-Pac stopped the count. After a ref bump, all the heels attacked Rock. Undertaker and Kane came out for the save. Rock went to hit Shane with a chair, but he moved, and Rock hit Undertaker. Undertaker then choke-slammed Rock and Triple H pinned him. While Rock has done more jobs than anyone with his level of drawing power has done, maybe ever, and certainly ever on television, when this show was over, my gut feeling even with the nature of the finish, it was the wrong job on the wrong day to the wrong guy. At the show, Bob Backlund was running around in the stands. It's hard to figure out why, since Rochester isn't exactly part of Connecticut's 1st District. A woman flashed the crowd during the commercial break before the Edge and Christian and Angle match, which distracted the crowd during the early part of the match. After the live show ended, they didn't do anything after the show to send the fans home happy with Rock doing a speech as would be expected. Tapings on June 6 from the HSBC Arena in Buffalo. The show started with dark matches with the Dupes over Funaki and Michinoku, and Joe E. Legend beat Rob Echevarria. For Heat, Benoit won a 4-way for the IC title over Jericho, Bob Holly, and Venus. Jericho had the walls on Venus, but the ref missed the tap, and Benoit hit Holly with a chair and got the pin. Jericho, not seeing the pin, acted as if he'd won. Bubba Ray Dudley beat Bossman when Buchanan interfered. Saturn beat Devon in a King of the Ring match when Tori, X-Pac and Road Dogg interfered. Saturn got the elbow off the top for the pin. Guerrero pinned Crash Holly to keep the European title with a flying Hurricane Rana off the top rope. Brown beat Blackman via DQ when Snow interfered, using the head, so that gimmick is back. Jericho pinned Test after maneuvering Test bumping into Stratus. The faction came out without Vince for a party with balloons and confetti coming from the ceiling. They all celebrated Rock losing again. Rock then came out and challenged Triple H. Triple H told Rock he should be mad at Undertaker. Undertaker came out on the bike and attacked the faction while Rock just watched. Finally, The Rock joined in. Undertaker went to hit X-Pac with a chair, but he moved and hit Rock instead. Rock was backstage looking for Undertaker and exchanged words with Kane. Too Cool beat Godfather and Malenko in a tag title match when Sexay pinned Malenko with a hip-hop drop. The faction set up DX vs. Rock and Kane and Undertaker as the main event. Benoit beat Jeff Hardy in a great IC title match. Benoit offered a handshake. Jeff accepted, but Benoit hit him with the belt. Dudley's beat Edge and Christian and Angle in a 2-on-3 when they did a 3D on Christian. They held a women's battle royal to determine the top contender for the title. Tori was ref. Kat, Terry, Ivory, Lita and Jacqueline were in. They did some Hogan-like eliminations through the ropes instead of over the top. Lita pinned Ivory with a moonsault as the final two. Tori then attacked Lita and Stephanie jumped in and pinned her immediately without even having a match. Guerrero beat Matt Hardy in a core match with a flying Hurricane Rana. Rikishi beat Venus via DQ when Rikishi was about to do the stinky face and Trish threw salt in his eyes. Venus attacked the stunned Rikishi, who juiced, but then made his own comeback, kicking Venus off the ramp and splashing him off the ramp. Venus went out on a stretcher. Rock and Undertaker and Kane beat DX when Undertaker pinned X-Pac after a choke slam. After the match, Rock accidentally hit Kane with a chair, but then hit Undertaker with a chair on purpose. Parents Television Council Honorary National Chairman Steve Allen and PTC Advisory Board member Dr. C. Dolores Tucker spoke this past week at the MCI WorldCom shareholders meeting in Clinton, Mississippi to demand the company pull its advertising out of SmackDown. The PTC has pressured MCI to pull out of the show for months, but the company's response has been that it denies it bears any responsibility for the content of the programs in sponsors. Allen spoke about 4 children who had killed other children by mimicking pro wrestling moves. Luckily they only know about 4 because there are several more than that. Allen gave MCI 1 week to pull out of the show or threatened them with a nationwide educational campaign to inform Americans that MCI WorldCom shares the offensive values of the WWF. The PTC claims that more than 35 companies, listing Wendy's, Ford, General Motors, Coca-Cola, AT&T, Man Mars, Clorox, State Farm Insurance, Office Depot, Walgreens, Saks Incorporated, Delta, Southwest Airlines, Allstate Insurance, Gap, Procter & Gamble, Hershey's, McDonald's, SBC Enterprises, Maytag, Colgate, Palmolive, Kellogg's, Pfizer, Domino's, Federated Department Stores, Best Foods, Wrigley's, Bank of America and Johnson & Johnson, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Coast Guard. There's an amazing contradiction from L. Brent Bozell, who spearheaded the original sponsorship boycott of SmackDown since he lashed out at Procter & Gamble for dropping sponsorship of Dr. Laura's TV show in the fall because of what they perceived as anti-gay comments on her radio show, claiming the pulling out of sponsorship amounted to a form of censorship. NCAA heavyweight champion Brock Lesnar of Minnesota has not signed, but there have been verbal agreements to many points of a deal. Lesnar was recruited by WWF, WCW and New Japan. If signed, it is believed Lesnar would start his career with Ohio Valley Wrestling. Expect a lot of announcements regarding team names, stadiums, etc. for the XFL over the next few weeks. At this point in time, there are said to be no plans to give a WWF feel to the product, such as name teams, Rattlesnakes or Smackdowns or Rocks or Undertakers or American Badasses. After his problems last week, Davey Boy Smith was taken off the active roster and was sent home for treatment in Calgary. Smith is taking care of his children and has gone through a myriad of problems, some self-created and others, such as the loss of family members, not the case. He's got numerous personal issues as well as tax issues pressing. He is still being kept on payroll. The plan right now is for Paul Bearer to be repackaged and kept out of the Undertaker-Kane storyline, perhaps returning in an old-time manager role under his previous name of Percy Pringle or another name but taking a similar Pringle-like character. A 30-minute film called Deadbeats that Mick Foley did back in his WCW days playing a bill collector is being released on video. Crash Holly was given a new hire contract, although his existing contract had not expired. After some discussion, the decision seems to be made to keep Taka Michinoku and Sho Funaki after their current deal expires. The Dupes are said to be close to debuting on television, and there is discussion of a possible angle for Scott Vick. Joe Hicklin, Joe E. Legend's visa problems have been taken care of, so that issue delaying his debut is no longer there. WWF has yet to make a decision on whether or not to renew Vic Grimes' developmental deal. WWF officials are claiming little or no interest in bringing in Kurt Hennig, whose WCW contract is expiring shortly. China will be on The Tonight Show on June 16th and Rock on June 21st. Big Show will be on Conan O'Brien on June 22nd. There appears to be a major angle set up for around the second week of July. The Canadian TV Guide had a 4-set cover for this week with Jericho, Tori, Rock, and Benoit. Really not much to the story on the inside. Kevin Kelly claimed on the WWF Bite This audio show that Todd Pettingle was lying when he claimed he would be returning to the WWF. WWF only had the top 4 videos in the Sports Rec charts this past week, with Rock at both number 1 and number 2, followed by Eve of Destruction and Austin vs. McMahon. ICP's Juggalo Championship Wrestling debuted at number 5, which is really scary considering that WCW has never had a video that high ever. WWF had spots 6 through 8 with Foley, Austin, who had been no lower than number 2 and usually number 1 for years now, at number 7, and Best of Raw, while XPW's Hardcore Conception is at number 9. There are no WCW videos in the top 20, while ECW doesn't even have any commercially released videos in the first place, and of the top 20, 15 are WWF. After SummerSlam, upcoming pay-per-view dates would be September 24th in Philadelphia at the FU Center, October 22nd in Albany, New York at Pepsi Arena, and November 19th in Tampa at the Ice Palace. SmackDown tapings on May 30th in Tacoma, Washington drew a sellout 17,730, paying $565,642. House show on June 3 in Milwaukee drew 13,560, paying $384,021, and house show on June 4 in Toronto drew 16,399 to Skydome, paying $556,993. Merchandise for the week at the venues totaled $408,388, which was $7.11 per head. In Milwaukee, they had Rock and Dudley's over DX as the main event, which they put on midway in the show, and put the tag title match with Too Cool over Tanda in the final slot. Toronto was a similar show. Rock pinned Triple H to win the six-man with the People's Elbow. Lita, wearing pants like the Hardys, interfered, giving the Hardys a win over Christian and Edge. Christian and Edge turned on the Toronto home fans when Edge wore a New Jersey Devils hockey jersey, talking about the Devils beating the Maple Leafs. Kat was in Too Cool's corner to counter Trish Stratus being in the corner of Tanda in the final match on the show. The readers' pages. WCW. I always hear tons of people going on about how bad it is that Vince Russo only books for the internet. Whether that is true or not, my question is, why is this a bad thing? There seems to be some belief that only 5% of wrestling fans have the internet. Yet recent stats show that 70% of the people in the United States have the internet. Where do people get their stats from? It looks like people are just pulling numbers out of their ass. I'm sick of this belief that only a select few wrestling fans have the internet. WWF.com gets about 200 million page views per month and is one of the hottest websites on the search engines. How is this possible if only 5% of wrestling fans have the internet? I was highly disappointed in the Bill Goldberg return. Like the Steve Austin return, they decided to hype it up segments earlier for ratings. With Austin, he was brought back for a buy rate. I love to see spontaneous things. Imagine how good it would be if we never knew Goldberg was back and he came racing out. Knowing he was back and would come out totally killed it. I like how WWF hyped Kane's return by having a mystery person attack Road Dogg and Vince. While it was a slight letdown that it was Kane, it was still spontaneous and a nice surprise. I'm really disappointed when Vince Russo appears on WCW Live. It seems whenever someone discusses anything about WCW, he just starts ranting against the WWF. Can't he take any criticism at all? Regarding the WCW quick title reigns, I think this could be valuable down the line, as when someone finally holds the title for a long time, they'll gain some credibility from being champion. However, if they try to do this, Vince Russo will come across as a hypocrite, although he's already that on so many levels, since he repeatedly talks about how long title reigns suck. Yet doesn't he claim to be the one who booked the Steve Austin vs. Vince McMahon feud? Austin held the title at one point for 7 months with only one drop. Graham McGaw. Response from Dave Meltzer. Nobody ever said 5% of wrestling fans have access to the internet. But it's probably 5% or less of the total wrestling fans that are serious about searching the internet for wrestling information. Of the 10 million different wrestling fans that watch every Monday, most are casual fans whose interest in wrestling begins and ends with what they see on television. This is evidenced by the reaction of fans at the building when topics that are huge on the internet are played out on television to zero crowd reaction. What was the buy rate when Douglas finally wrestled Flair? Under in 0.2. What was the rating when they got that feud off the ground? That shows how much 7 years of internet hype means as far as selling tickets. When WCW did the Hulk Hogan vs. Bret Hart match in San Francisco, the news was on the internet the day of the show, yet there was no walk-up for this supposed first dream match. Yet in the building, when it was announced, the place came unglued, which showed there would have been interest in seeing the match, except people didn't know it was taking place. And in the building, the few thousand hardcore fans who still buy tickets, virtually none, and by none it was definitely less than 5%, and the same could be said for Los Angeles the next night when the news of San Francisco already got out, and LA is a city where Hart was a bigger star over time, and it still resulted in no walk-up business. Had any idea this match was taking place? It would be a waste to throw Goldberg's return out there with no build-up out of nowhere. You're wasting a segment that should draw ratings by throwing it out there without building anticipation. It was a weak enough build-up in the first place, and it resulted in a very poor rating for the segment. Surprises are nice, but not for things that have drawing power and pissing the rating or buy rate away for the sake of doing a surprise. Anyone who has been around the WWF for any length of time will tell you the main event angles are, and always have been, the decisions of Vince McMahon. Others have input, but decisions regarding title changes and how the angles run and who has the belt were never decided by Russo, always by McMahon. What was the last big money drawing feud that did not involve a federation's world title in some way, shape, or form? Every money-drawing angle of the past few years, whether it was the NWO, Austin vs. McMahon, the McMahon-Helmsley regime, etc., has involved as its primary cause the chasing of the world title. I can't come up with one major money-making angle that didn't. So if there hasn't been even one strong money-making angle over the past few years that didn't involve chasing a strong world title, then why does Vince Russo think the world title is little more than a prop to pass around on a weekly basis? It's not like there is any historical precedent for Russo's way of thinking that titles don't matter today. It's not like the ratings have skyrocketed since the world title has been booked in the manner it has been. What's surprising is that Russo spent all that time in the WWF, all the things that drew money there, as well as all the things that didn't, and chooses to book counter to everything he should have learned. Jamie Gerard. DM. There have been some, that they are the distinct minority, and how hard you have to look to find them as exceptions basically does prove the rule. The progression of Vince Russo as a TV personality has been amazing. When he debuted, most were turned off by him and thought he shouldn't be on camera. Maybe he was just nervous. His performance in the Ric Flair saga was incredible. Let's just hope he doesn't become a mark for his own acting ability. Because he's already a mark for his booking ability. He has nothing but excuses when it comes to the ratings and the buy rates. He can rationalize anything and talk about how great he used to be. But the numbers tell the truth. He needs to look in the mirror and realize his product stinks and makes no sense. He still is pushing the wrong people as the top babyface, Hogan and Nash, and the new blood is spinning its wheels going nowhere, still without a major victory over a top MC member. You have written at length of the problems in the organization, but I see another one. Russo, the organization, for whatever reason, will not get new wrestlers over as serious superstars. Sting got over, and that was more than 10 years ago. Paul White was a no-brainer. Bill Goldberg became a star quickly, was also a no-brainer. They still had no clue what to do with him, and the minute he got the belt, they started destroying him, and they succeeded in doing so. Not only can't they get new people over, they destroy the stars they get. Bret Hart was arguably the hottest commodity in the business when they got him, and they killed him off. Bam Bam Bigelow is just a face in the crowd. How long before Mike Awesome means nothing, if he even means anything to start with? And boy, has Billy Kidman gotten over thanks to his feud with Hogan. Vampiro should have never turned. But he was gaining momentum, so they had to do something to derail him. Contrast that with Vince McMahon. Everyone is new. He took a wrestler who was MIA 6 months ago and made him a star by showing his ass. Too Cool never talks, they aren't big, and they are bigger stars than they ever should be. Vince has lost Bret Hart, Owen Hart, Ken Shamrock, Undertaker, and Steve Austin. What happened? The company still got stronger. WCW pushes Chuck Palumbo, and we're supposed to care. Who is he? Who are the Mamalukes? We see them twice and they have the belts. Where were the watershed matches that made them stars and people we should care about? Sting had it in 1988. Do you think Bischoff now wishes he had pushed Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho? The belt means nothing. Bill Goldberg's return won't mean squad because they don't use him right. They book like they are a team in the playoffs when they should be rebuilding for the future. Paul Nucci. Port Austin, Michigan. I just got done listening to the latest edition of WCW Live with wrestling's only creative genius, Vince Russo. The guy is either working in character 24/7 or he's certifiably insane. Let's look at some of this week's gems. Vince McMahon knows what I gave to that company, and so does every guy in the locker room. To say that David Arquette will have any negative impact on WCW is ridiculous. Let's not forget the WWF before Vince Russo. T.L. Hopper. The Goon. Ooh. Those characters were 100 times worse. There's no doubt the days of Hopper, Goon, and who were bad ones for WWF, but the fact Russo has to bring up abominations like that to justify his giving Arquette the world title is proof in itself what a failure it was. Yeah, I am prepared to bump. I knew that going in. I care about one thing and one thing only. Not screwing up and making them look bad. Being around it as much as I am, you kinds know what to do, what not to do. I hope he never looks at the video of him with Reed Fleer. He couldn't even take a bump for a single leg takedown or a spear without making it look bad. We're going to go one step further, about introducing an acting class for wrestlers. We are going to start recruiting actors and teaching them how to wrestle. That's something that's never been done before. That shows you how much the business has changed. If I can learn how to work in the ring, I'm pretty sure anyone can. It's the changing business. This was the most ridiculous statement of all. If I can learn to work in the ring, I'm pretty sure anyone can. Pretty much sums up what Russo thinks of the wrestlers in the business. First of all, when did he learn to work? His short stints have been just terrible. Jim Cornette was right when he said this guy has absolutely no respect for the business. The fact that someone with so little respect for the work that its performers put into can rise to such a position is embarrassing. I blame Vince McMahon. Listening to this clown when he had people who were real wrestling experts like Jim Ross, Jim Cornette and Bruce Pritchard is scary. I'm not saying those guys were the be-all and end-all and didn't make mistakes, but the WWF product has only gained steam since Russo fled. The truth is that the WWF turnaround wasn't due to Vince McMahon or Russo. It was Bret Hart and Steve Austin who lit the fire. It was Austin becoming such a big star that led the turnaround, and nobody except Steve Austin deserves the main credit for it. McMahon and Russo may have been smart enough to realize what they had and ran with it, but that is the extent of the credit they should be able to take. A performer who puts it all together like Austin comes around once every few decades, and the WWF lucked out and found two of them with Rock, hence a super run. People should give credit where credit is due. This success starts and ends with the talent. McMahon himself is also a super talent in front of the camera. Russo is an embarrassment to the profession both in front of and behind the camera. I've been criticized for criticizing the WWF. I'm daring the fans, asking them nicely, watch our show and watch their show. Then tell me right now which is the more creative show, the fresher show. Watch Nitro and Thunder. Give it a chance. See what Bischoff and Russo have brought to the table. I dare anyone to tell me the WCW product sucks right now. We just have to get more people to tune in. Sample the product. You'll get hooked. I watch Nitro and Thunder and they generally stink. I guess that means I must be on the WWF payroll. I give Russo credit for one thing. He's trying. The Bush/Sullivan regime didn't even seem to care and seemed to be more concerned with cutting costs than putting on an entertaining product. Compared to them, he is a success. Compared to anyone else that has run a wrestling company, he's a miserable failure. His definition of creativity is who runs more items per segment and more lame angles. By that criteria, he's the winner. A word to the wise, sometimes less is more. The WWF product is light years ahead of WCW right now in every area, including creativity. Goldberg was done by 9:03. From 9:03 to 9:15, Goldberg had nothing to do with the ratings. You can't pin that whole quarter hour on Goldberg. He was out there for 3 minutes. People are going to hold him responsible for the whole 15? That's absolutely ludicrous. The critics are going to do everything to bury WCW. The fans need to ask themselves, whose payroll are they on? Who's paying Wade Keller and Dave Meltzer? If Goldberg wasn't meant to spike a rating, why did Russo push his return so hard and place him in the all-important 9 p.m. slot? The answer, of course, is obvious. The most creative thing Russo has done in his latest go-around is come up with a different excuse every week for the ratings, attendance and buy rates being so bad. Any way you slice it, Goldberg's return was a ratings failure. And it has nothing to do with Goldberg. He's been surrounded by an inferior product for so long. No matter how much charisma he personally possesses, he can't overcome the rest of the crap Russo trots out there on Mondays, so the average fan is watching the superior show. Wrestling is just common sense, something Russo doesn't seem to possess. As for you being on the WWF payroll, I think the WWF needs to ask for their money back after reading your WWF coverage over the years. But since they haven't asked for their money back, could you tell me when I'll be getting my check for criticizing wrestling's only creative genius? After all, it's only people like me who keep the Mighty Vinny Rude down, so I would think the WWF should be very grateful. I mean, none of this could possibly be Russo's fault, could it? John McMullen. Response from Dave Meltzer. Bottom line, the Goldberg segment was put in that spot designed to pop a quarter-hour rating. It failed. Anyone who blames Goldberg misses the point. He can't be held responsible since it was only 3 minutes, but the segment was booked for Goldberg to only be out for 3 minutes, and did fail to keep the audience from switching at the top of the hour, which was the whole objective, to pop a big rating by bringing Goldberg back before he's fully healed. Why is it that Lex Luger is on the verge of getting fired for not wanting to look stupid and complaining about an angle, but guys like Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan, who do what they want when they want, and never put over any young talent at all regardless of what they both publicly say, don't even get a speck of criticism from within WCW or Russo? Luger complaining about doing an angle seems to be far less of a problem than Nash and Hogan agreeing to do angles, then sabotaging them by not selling for anyone. Isn't this the exact same problem that dragged WCW down? Isn't it being perpetuated by the same two people as all along? Why use Luger as an example? That's like a teacher suspending a kid for chewing gum in class as an example while other kids are still bringing knives to school. Isn't it funny how Russo says in one interview that he never forced Elizabeth to do any angle that she didn't want to do, and less than 5 days later in another interview, he's talking about firing Lex and her because he tried to force them to do an angle that they refused to do? Tony Urashima, PTC. Just wanted your take on a question I had. The PTC says it will pressure MCI WorldCom to drop its sponsorship of SmackDown for what they consider offensive content. However, on the PTC website, PTC head L. Brent Bozell lashed out at Procter & Gamble for dropping their sponsorship of Dr. Laura Schlesinger's TV show this fall. Procter & Gamble, American Airlines and Atant say they don't want to sponsor Schlesinger's show because of anti-gay comments she's made on her radio show. Bozell actually had the nerve to say that the gay rights protest of Schlesinger's show and advertisers' pullout amount to censorship when in reality gay groups are using the exact same tactic that Bozell's group is using in its opposition to SmackDown, with the same offensive content rationalization. Is Bozell saying that protests from the political left against Dr. Laura are censorship but protests from the political right against SmackDown are valid and okay? How can anyone take Bozell seriously with this gross double standard? It seems to me that the offensiveness is in the eyes of the beholder here. Bozell seems to think if a product is offensive to him, it should be off the air, or at least buried in a late-night time slot. But if a product goes along with his political beliefs, it should be promoted, and anyone who raises questions about its offensiveness is a censor. How he got so influential in the press is beyond me. Dr. Tucker. Jumbo Tsuruta. On May 19th, I had a March 1999 issue of the Observer photocopied for a minister friend of mine in New England, which had a letter of mine to you concerning how highly I thought of the legendary Jumbo Tsuruta vs. Mitsuharu Misawa match at Budokan Hall from June of 1990. At about 1:30 p.m. the next day, I was watching the very same match while making a videotape for my friend. While watching the 10-year-old match, I couldn't help but think, wow, this is what I've always appreciated about wrestling. Just a few hours later, the Observer arrived and I opened it to discover that Tsuruta had passed away. I know you were at that match live and it must have struck you hard when the news of his passing arrived. One of my final memories of him was from Shohei Baba's funeral, dressed up in his nice suit. Shaunasla, Francois. Leesburg, Florida. Response from Dave Meltzer. My final memory of Tsuruta was when they did that career retrospective show last March, and it was of Misawa at the Narita airport waving goodbye to Tsuruta as he took his wife and family to the United States. For some reason that scene, with very little visible emotion, was one of the most emotional scenes I've ever seen regarding pro wrestling. Pro wrestling. Twice now in recent months you've given your definition of what pro wrestling is. You always say pro wrestling is and always has been whatever works at the time billed as pro wrestling. I have to disagree. My 30 years of watching pro wrestling has taught me a lot about the business and people. Wrestling is a controlled form of competition, with most times having a predetermined ending. It may be like a soap opera at times. It has good interviews, good acting, and most of all, should be a good show that leaves the fans wanting to see more of it. A chair shot is fine. Not 20 in every match. Not chainsaws, garbage dumpsters, near-naked women showing a surgically enlarged body parts. And it's definitely not being cussed at and talked to with vulgar sexual innuendos during most interviews. Whether you call it soft porn or hardcore porn, it's still porn. And that's what wrestling is now. I haven't watched since Bret Hart and Kevin Nash said shit 3 times within 20 minutes back in December. I've got better ways to waste my free time than being offended by nasty gyrating, naked bodies and being cussed at. Bobby Yates. Randleman, North Carolina. I went to my first pro wrestling show in 1969 at the Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles. I've attended live shows in 15 or 16 states, Calgary, Vancouver, and was fortunate to be able to see an All Japan show in 1981 and have been to see Lucha Libre in Mexico 3 or 4 times. I started wrestling folk style in 1971 and continued through high school, college, then in AAU and USA Wrestling. I wrestled my last match in 1984 and currently I coach at a middle school in the winter and run a freestyle/Greco club in the spring. Although I enjoy the storylines and angles, I watch the matches with a critical eye and have a deep respect for those who are the best at creating the illusion. This is the advantage WWF has over WCW. From top to bottom, the guys in the WWF can really work. If the WCW has any success at all, they can thank Ric Flair. Other than him and Terry Funk, who do they have that can work? If they have others who can, they've stifled them somehow or another. I had to laugh when I heard that Vince Russo thinks he can trade actors to be wrestlers. For God's sake, he couldn't even sell Reed Fleer's leg shots. I'd like to see WCW do well. When both major promotions are succeeding, we the fans are the winners. However, WWF is heads and shoulders above WCW at this point. I enjoy the MMA, however, as a coach, myself and some other coaches are somewhat concerned with it. We are wondering how long it will be before some overzealous dads want their 10-year-olds out there doing submissions. When I first started watching pro wrestling, the Los Angeles office was arguably the beat in the country. Fred Blassie was the top heat getter, both as a heel and then later as a huge babyface. The Friday night twice monthly shows were sold out and we got to see all of the big name stars of the era. Blassie left for the WWF and the promotion went from huge crowds and big names to pushing Killer Brooks and Sir Oliver Humperdinck. All these years, I've wondered what happened. Bronc Wise, Sacramento, California. Response from Dave Meltzer. Since many people who were in Southern California, including people in the office, are avid readers, there are many who could answer these questions better than I could and hopefully they will. Racial discrimination suits. I want to thank you and Ben Miller by extension for shining the light on the questionable practices of WCW and WWF with regard to their treatment of minorities. ECW is not to be excused either. Even though the two big promotions expose their characters on television nationally, nobody ever really challenges their effect in our society. I hope you will continue to talk about this and it will not get to be a tired subject. Booker T was so obviously uncomfortable with the GI Bro gimmick. For all of those people who would want to know why he would be uncomfortable with the gimmick he used when he was a rookie, it's real simple. Look back at old photos and do you ever wonder, what the hell was I thinking? When you see your haircut or choice of clothes, give Mr. Huffman the same space. He probably used that gimmick at that time to make it easier for a culturally challenged booker to put him over in the first place. Keep pointing out how wrong it is for a well-spoken man like Eddie Guerrero to play a backwards gang-banging, uneducated character, especially when there is no Latino counterpart character in the WWF. There are Caucasian undesirable characters in wrestling, but there are the opposite characters as well. Too much slack has been cut to Vince Russo with this. He is booking what he knows, what he grew up with excuse. That shouldn't fly for a grown man who learned how to run a video store, learned TV production, learned structured writing, okay, the jury is still out on that one, and learned the wrestling business. How am I supposed to now accept that he hasn't learned the first thing about Black, Asian or Spanish people? It's strange how many Caucasian wrestlers tan themselves deep brown and try to project a hip/cool urban attitude. They speak in what they think is a black way, like Randy Savage, Kevin Nash, Dusty Rhodes, Hollywood Hogan, Steve Austin and even the new Undertaker. They are all perfect examples of a long-running trend. Undertaker yo, stank ass. Comment to Vince McMahon pretty much proves my point. I've suggested that you and Ben Miller would have more of a concrete solution to the problem if your butts were on the line. But I failed to offer a solution myself. Just do it. That's all. Vince McMahon, Vince Russo and Paul E. just have to wake up and say, today I can set this right and it will be right. So many things are never done because deep down inside people just don't really want to do anything about them. I hope that in the year 2000, my favorite sport can change its mind about minority portrayals as easily as it divested itself from the demeaning presentation of midgets. It just happened. Why can't this happen? Donald Cleveland, Brooklyn, New York. Whether it's the clash of titans in the ring or the drama that unfolds outside it, we're here to break it down, match by match, feud by feud. Remember, in the world of wrestling, every day is a battle, and every victory is a story waiting to be told. Until next time, keep the passion alive, and never stop wrestling with the possibilities. This is the Pro Wrestle Machine,